Before I try to retell this harrowing tale, know that before it happened, my family and I would take yearly trips to log cabins in the Austrian Alps. Before, they were perfect. Now, well, you'll see. Just under 2 years ago, myself, my wife, and my 6-year-old daughter Lucy were on our way up one of these wild mountains, encumbered by a heavy load of presents stuffed in the boot, ready for Christmas. It was 2 days before Christmas Day, and we were looking forward to a cozy log cabin situated just a couple more minutes up the road, with a few others dotted around elsewhere relatively nearby, but not close enough for interaction. Once we had arrived, we began unloading the car, telling Lucy to go and explore the cabin, mostly to sneak in the presents without her knowing. As we took out the last present, I noticed something move in the corner of my eye, somewhere along the tree line a couple yards out, that made me swivel my head to glance over.
"What's wrong, honey?"
My wife asked. I turned to face her and to give her a quick smile to tell her everything was okay. I had an uneasy feeling, but it didn't seem uncommon enough for me to worry about. We went inside shortly after. The next day, there was a blizzard warning for that same evening, Christmas Eve. We discussed leaving, but the weather forecast stated it would be cleared 3 days after the initial storm. There were no refunds, so we were going to take our chances. Hours later, the blizzard was in full swing. Outside the windows was a raging storm of pure white. The howling noise of the blizzard was deafening, until it was abruptly broken by the sound of glass shattering in one of the rooms.
"What was that?"
Lucy jumped up and screamed. "Lucy, stay here with Mommy." I nodded to my wife as she beckoned for Lucy to come over for a hug. Swiftly after, I raced off towards the source of the noise. Down the corridor on the left, there was a much louder howling noise, and gusts of snow were bursting out into the corridor. I quickly poked my head around the corner, suddenly witnessing a smashed window and a flood of snow gushing through the debris of the window. Immediately, I checked around the room for some kind of entry device, like a rock or perhaps something man-made. After a quick search, I failed to find a rock anywhere in the room or any other kind of entry device. There was also furniture in the room, so to be safe, I double-checked each one, still resulting in nothing. I told my wife about what had happened, and we agreed that the best thing we could do was to shut the door to the room, as an attempt to conserve heat and avoid any more snow making its way into our cabin. We went to bed that night quite unsettled by the ordeal. Eventually, though, we made it to sleep, with the wail of the storm roaring outside. In the morning, we woke up to silence. No howling wind, we thought. No Lucy? We realized. Every Christmas morning for 4 years in a row, Lucy had come stampeding in, jumping in her bed and dragging the two of us out of bed to go open presents. But why not this morning? We wondered, alarmed. We sprung out of bed and hurriedly made our way to her room. But on our way, we saw the door to the room with the broken window was now open. Panic was beginning to set in, making my wife and I dash to Lucy's room, flinging the door open to an empty bed. Both our faces went white with dread as we bolted back down the corridor to the broken window room. Upon entry, the two of us screamed in horror whilst remaining frozen in confused panic. We stared at a tunnel leading out from the smashed window through the thick snow. There was also a bit of torn clothing left on a fragment of glass. For a moment, we were too astounded and terrified to do anything, until we heard the sound of Lucy's voice ringing out from the tunnel. Instantly, I threw myself into the tunnel, crawling through with gritted determination. "Don't worry, Lucy, Daddy's coming!" I shouted down the tunnel. In no more than a 10-second sprint, I could make out Lucy's shadow in the darkness. She was squirming around frantically, and around what looked like her neck was an arm, squeezing against it tightly. I grabbed her by the leg, pulling her away. Suddenly, light flooded into the tunnel as the snow fell in from above. It was daytime. Now before me, hunched over like a devil, was a man. His skin had crusted over the dirt, his back still turned. I tucked Lucy behind me as I lunged at him. He still wasn't facing me, even as I clutched his leg, ready to beat him to death. But as my hand finished closing around his ankle, a heavy boot hit me in the face, knocking me backwards as I reeled in agony. As I regained focus, I glared with hatred as the man turned to me and grinned, showing a set of roughly sharpened and decaying teeth before leaping out of the tunnel. I tried to follow him, but as I poked my head out of the tunnel, I saw he was practically at the tree line already. Hey! Get back here! Get back here! Get back here, you freak! I screamed at him, only to stop and stare with a mixed feeling of terror and murderous intent as he stopped, turned, and cocked his head to the side. Then, he grinned again. This time, he pointed at me, and then to the woods. He then turned and fled off into the thick foliage of snow and dark green behind him. He was gone. I returned back to help Lucy out of the tunnel and into the open arms of her mother. She had several bruises on her head and one rim of purple that was turning black around her neck. She was weak from the struggle, and soon she had passed out once more. We arrived at a hospital several hours later. Now, after 2 years, a police report had finally come out responding to the matter. In the police report was the following. April 6, 2005. A man was seen coming in and out of a nearby woodland by some locals around Christmas time. In the areas he was sighted, namely that of holiday cabins, there were cases reported of missing children. Following a police investigation, the man was found, along with the children. All were located in a makeshift wooden den, deep into the forest. The children were identified through analysis of their bones and any bits of flesh that still remained on the bones. However, most were either charred or rotten. The man in question has been given life for cannibalism, kidnapping, and murder. Our thoughts are with those that have been subjected to this tragedy. As my wife and I read the report, we cried. The tears were both horror and gratitude as we watched Lucy dash around the house, laughing and giggling, brimming with vitality. She escaped, but just barely.
Should we really let the newbie take night shift on her own? Isn't it?
I scoffed inwardly as my coworkers talked about me behind my back again. I'd really only gone to the loo, but there they were, chatting as if I had left the place completely. Didn't they realize just how loud they were? I can handle myself just fine. I might have been new to this particular Burger King, but I'd manned the night shift down the road in another chain for a year prior. I could handle a drunk group or two. Heck, on my nights off, I was part of the drunk groups.
Oh, Eve, sorry.
Jeremiah was a lanky kid, younger than me, but already a manager. He had a forgettable face and eyes that constantly rested on my chest. You want more cash, is that it? Split the shift with the unknowing newcomer or something? Were you expecting me to pay you to stay with me or something? Perhaps I was a bit mean, but I was quite used to this behavior. After all, I've done it too. Fear-mongering newcomers so they'd split their cash with you to take care of them was pretty common. Sadly for Jeremiah, I wasn't born the day before.
No!
His voice broke halfway through the word, and the kid quickly shook his head, embarrassed. If she doesn't want company, we might as well get going. I hate being here at night, too.
But shouldn't we tell her about...
Andrea was a skinny chick, clad in black all day, every day. She looked on edge, which I couldn't help but roll my eyes at. Was she scared of the peering eyes of university kids that could turn more serious at night? A few minutes passed as the pair picked up their stuff. They were still talking quietly, but I didn't bother to listen. I preferred working alone, mostly because that meant I could play whatever music I wanted and study while still keeping an eye out for whoever that needed a fix. Still, I was in an unfamiliar environment. It was a bit odd, not knowing the exact layout of the restaurant or even which ice cream machine was supposed to be broken, being cleaned, at what time. Half an hour into me just browsing my phone, the lights directly over my head flickered. Had I blinked, I'd missed the brief darkness that descended upon the counter. Looks like the bulb needs to be changed soon, huh? I couldn't help but yawn. It'd been a long day. And yet, I knew that it wasn't a good idea to nap, not when it was so late. While it was rare for anything to happen, I nearly jumped out of my skin at the loud noise, but it was just thunder. Oh, who are you? Welcome to Burger King. No answer came, which made me feel a bit wary. I was no stranger to weird people. Heck, I was weird myself, but it was still strange. Are you here to eat? Or are you lost? It is storming outside. The trees surrounding the restaurant shook with the force of the wind. Still, you'll need to buy something to stay here. Sorry, but those are the rules. Whoa, what? Huh? Ugh, who is it now? What do you mean? Wait, how do you even have my... I slammed my phone on the counter. Why was that kid texting me all of a sudden? And why did I feel so much fear creeping into my heart? It has to be a prank. Yeah, that little... I shook my head quickly, trying my best to not curse on the clock. However, I nearly shrieked when I saw it. The person from before, again, but something was wrong with them. Where? What? What do you want? I knew it was too weird, too elaborate to be a prank, but I had no idea what to do. I felt as if my heart was beating in my throat. My hands were sweaty and I was cold, but hot too at the same time. I wanted to run away, but I was so worried that it would follow me. What do you mean? Where is my bear? What bear was she looking for? Just who is she? All I had to do was wait until the morning. Jeremiah said I'd be fine, and yet I didn't feel safe. Who would have, really? I tried to think of a way to get out, maybe through the back door, or was it really the best to stay quiet? I'm honestly not sure what I was thinking when I signed up for an anonymous Secret Santa program online. I was bored and lonely after a nasty breakup, and I desperately wanted someone to seek me out, to think of me. In retrospect, maybe I should have just tried online dating. Still, all I wanted was a gift. A single, heartwarming little bundle of joy. Gosh, even thinking that makes me roll my eyes. I've never been the sappy kind, but I just wanted to be cared for, just once in my life. Looks like that was far too much to ask for. I sighed, tapping the side of the small black box anxiously as I peered into it once more. Maybe its contents would be replaced by something more favorable, more normal, perhaps. Maybe I was just going crazy, and the present I got was completely normal. No matter how many times I looked away and back, the contents of the box remained exactly the same. What the? Pictures of me from when I was still married to my ex right up until now. Some were very recent. On one, I was decorating the Christmas tree in my cheesy patterned pajamas. But the thing was, something didn't quite add up. There were pictures where I knew there was no one in the house with me when they were taken. A few where I was lounging on the couch, face tear-stained, hair messy, an awful sight, really. But there were photos where I was different. On some, I was smiling happily, staring nearly into the camera. On others, I was sleeping peacefully. I wanted to gag. Was this my mother pulling some wild prank on me? I'd fallen out with her a few years ago, roughly when I divorced my ex. She felt like I'd given up on a comfortable life because I didn't want to stay with that jerk, because I shook my head. My ex was the past, and I really needed to start thinking about him. He wasn't the reason why I was so distressed at the moment, after all. Maybe it was him? Maybe he's trying to force me to run back to his open arms, terrified? I mumbled to myself mostly, some of my words slurred together. My thoughts felt jumbled and body heavy, though it was likely due to the sock still barely allowing me to think clearly. Pat has moved on from me ages ago. Heck, we divorced because he moved on while we were still together. Stupid cheater. But then, what was going on? No letter came with the photos, though they were all dated. On most of them, the ink was a bit smudged, as if they'd been pocketed quickly. That didn't really give me any better idea of the photographer behind them, but it felt a bit odd. Who are you kidding, girl? Whoever took these pictures is a lunatic, with or without the ink smudges. And yet, I felt just as crazy as I looked through them again and again, desperately trying to look for a signature, a name, or just anything. I found nothing. But then, it dawned on me. The website I'd signed up for was supposed to let me know where my present came from once I opened it. Ha! Looks like whoever they are, they won't stay anonymous for long. I'll just call the cops and... I said that perhaps a touch too haughtily. Half of my sentence was caught in my throat, silenced by the familiar thud of the main door being closed. Of course, I was so busy trying to comprehend the situation that I'd forgotten one important detail. Whoever had taken these photos had access to my house. After all, most of them looked like they'd been taken from inside the house. Sure, maybe they'd been standing outside on something, perhaps straight behind the windows in that one spot that never got dusty, but there had to be some angles they couldn't get from there. Who's there? My voice sounded a lot raspier, a lot more scared suddenly. I stood up on shaky legs, bounding towards my bedroom's white wooden door to shut it before...
Hey, don't worry. It's just your Secret Santa.
A painfully familiar voice made me swallow hard. Pat. But why? It made sense, though. I don't think I ever asked him to give his key back when he left. My attorney urged me to do so, to communicate with him, but I refused. There was no way I could talk to him after all he'd done to me. After that, he abandoned me at my weakest. And yet...
Surprise!
The man whose voice I used to adore cheered. He sounded like he was much closer now, sneaking up the stairs like the cat we used to have. The cat that he threw out on the streets because she was too loud.
Your mother told me that you were lonely. She's been asking some friends of yours to keep an eye on you, and well, it's clear that you never quite bounced back. I felt guilty, so I'm here to make things right, honey.
Why did I almost believe him for a second there? I trembled, pushing against the wall. He knew where he'd find me, of course, so I knew hiding was useless, but I felt desperate for that upper hand just for a second. He'd taken so much from me before, and he was suddenly back, destroying the one nice thing I'd wanted to do so badly. My only wish. I shook my head. No, he wasn't going to do it. I had to. I had to do something. A shaky breath nearly got caught in my lungs when 3 quick knocks sounded on the bedroom door. It used to be familiar. It used to be our thing, just knocking on random surfaces to announce our arrivals or to get each other's attention. But it sounded threatening. It felt like if I allowed him in, something terrible would happen. I didn't realize I opened the window until I was standing in front of it, the merciless winter wind hitting me in the face every few seconds. It was so cold, and I was up quite high. But I didn't care. I wanted the one way out.
Wait, honey, you need to...
I stood in the window for a few seconds, crossing my fingers that I'd be fine. Just like the cat I'd loved once, I thought I would land on my feet, though the ground was covered in ice. I didn't.
Everyone is usually in high spirits as Christmas approaches. We all think about gifts and what to cook for the holidays. Without a doubt, it's the children's favorite holiday. But I like New Year's Eve a lot more. I don't know how many of you do, but there's something about New Year's that I just love. Maybe it's welcoming in the new year, wiping the slate clean, setting new goals, or the simple fact that you don't have to spend so much money on gifts for the kids. Everyone loves the new year. Or rather, almost everyone. This is the story of when I met a person who not only didn't like New Year's, but was terrified of it. That night, his fear turned into despair. Despair turned to anger. And anger turned to resentment. Resentment that almost drove that man to take away the most important thing I have in my life, my family. The night where it all happened had started off well enough. The conversation at the table was lively, and we were all excited for a new year. We toasted with glasses of champagne, hugged, and watched the children play with each other. As the family enjoyed dinner, I admit that despite not believing in it, my mind wandered to the rumors and apocalyptic theories that were circulating in those days. The ancient Mayans were said to have predicted the end of the world for December 2012, and many people were worried about it then. As if in response to my thoughts, in the middle of the celebration, there was a knock on the door of the house. We all looked at each other in surprise. We weren't expecting any visitors. I got up from the table and headed for the door. When I opened it, I was met by a man dressed as a priest, with an anguished expression on his face and a sign that read, "The end of the world is imminent. Repent of your sins." Before I could even ask him what he needed, he started yelling at me.
Kid, what do you think you're doing?
I'm at a family dinner. Excuse me, do you need something?
How can you afford to be having dinner when you and your family will all be dead in no time?
Excuse me?
Do you live in a tin can? Today's the end of the world. When 2012 comes, you and your family will die and go to hell. You need to be in church. You all should be in church. Don't you understand? It's your last chance to repent of your sins.
Okay, I'm already repenting of opening the door.
What do you think you're doing? You're gonna turn your back on God?
I assure you, sir, you're closer to the asylum than you are to God. Now get out of here before I call the police. And stop shouting nonsense like today is the end of the world. You'll scare someone. And without another word, I slammed the door in his face. I admit that I didn't treat him very well. After all, he was clearly a person who had a mental problem. But at that moment, I was pretty angry. The man almost broke into my house and terrified my whole family, especially the kids. What else was I supposed to do? After that, everyone else at the table kept talking about this strange man. But like any other topic that comes up at the table, within minutes we were talking about something else. After that, the night went on, and before I knew it, the new year had already arrived and we were still alive. What do you know? And we were all still alive. When I woke up the next day, the first thing I did was grab my head from pain. Apparently I had a hangover, which makes sense because during the night before I definitely had too much to drink. When I checked my house, I was alone. My parents were probably continuing the party at my aunt and uncle's house, where they always get together to eat. Since I'm an adult, I'm sure they expected me to go on my own if I wanted to. Still pretty sleepy, I turned on the TV and plopped down on the couch. But before I could choose which program to watch, I heard a noise. The glass in my bedroom window had broken. I ran towards it to see what had happened, and at that moment, I was paralyzed with fear. A man was coming through the broken window of my room. I knew that man. It was the man dressed as a priest from yesterday. Unlike the night before, he was almost completely unclothed. His look had also changed. He no longer had that frantic, paranoid look with which he yelled at my family. The man looked furious, determined. As soon as I saw him, I threw myself behind the huge couch to hide. My exit door was so far away. I had no way to escape without running into him. My best chance was to hide while I waited for the best chance to escape. Meanwhile, the man slowly walked through the house, shouting and hitting everything with his huge arms.
I am the Lord, God of all mankind. Is there anything impossible for me? My body and spirit may faint, but God strengthens my heart. He is my eternal inheritance. I know you're here, kid. And you know what? I came to congratulate you. You were right. The world goes on.
The man was getting closer and closer to me. He didn't have the slightest idea where he was, but if he kept walking, he would bump into me without a doubt. Suddenly, When he was only a few steps away, I heard the sound of a car behind me. It was my family. Why were they back so early? Had they come looking for me? While I was wondering the reason for their arrival, I heard a laugh that made my blood run cold.
If you lost the courage to talk to me like last night, maybe your family can give me some explanations for you.
And without further ado, I listened as the man ran away back the way he came. I knew what was happening. The psycho was about to attack my family. I ran after him. I didn't know what he was going to try to do, but I had to stop him. I grabbed a broken glass to defend myself and crossed the same window as him. I was ready to fight. I was ready to defend my family. But when I got outside, it was all over. My parents were outside the car. My younger brother was with them crying. A few inches away from them, there were 3 policemen arresting the man.
But I say to you, love your enemies. Bless those who curse you. Do good to those who hate you.
When they took me to testify a few minutes later, I found out everything. The man had smashed my window with a brick, but to my good fortune, several neighbors had seen him and called the police. The man confessed to the police that he intended to kill me and my whole family with his bare hands. His motive? He really thought it was the end of the world, so he killed his whole family to free them from such a horrible fate. When 12 o'clock came and he saw that the whole world was still going on, he realized his mistake. The only way he could overcome such a shock was to come looking for me, the boy who had been right, the boy who had ridiculed him. I'm not gonna lie to you and tell you that since that day I don't like New Year's Eve anymore. That would be a vile lie. New Year's Eve is still my favorite holiday. I still love it. But from now on, I always watch who's behind the door before I open it. And if someone else can, I'm not going to open it.
At the beginning of summer 2009, my parents had finally ended a rough divorce and an even rougher custody battle. The judge decided that we were to spend summers with our dad, who moved from Portland to San Diego. On the first day of summer, Dad's brother, Uncle Joe, arrived at my mom's house. Dad was busy at work and asked Uncle Joe to drive us. My brother, Jaden, practically dove into his car. He had heard a lot about San Diego and couldn't wait to hit the beach. I, though, wasn't exactly happy about the idea. I had turned 16 in June and I was hoping to spend the summer with my friends. The goal was to drive from Oregon down the Pacific Coast Highway to San Diego in 1 week. Joe said it was something he always wanted to do. I admit the view was beautiful at first, though after a while of staring out the passenger side window, the scenery starts to become a blur.
How about burgers for dinner?
Joe asked as he drove. Huh? I pulled the headphones from my ears. Yeah, sure.
How about you, Jaden? Burgers cool with you?
I looked in the back seat, seeing my brother focused on his video game. He's cool. I turned back to the side window when I noticed a man wearing a cowboy hat, dressed in old clothing and a red checkered handkerchief around his neck, stood with his thumb out as he walked beside the road. Joe drove on, not bothering to look at the man.
Hey, Jaden, why don't you put down the game and look out the window for once? You don't know what you're missing.
That's strange. I didn't think there were any farms around here.
What was that?
The hitchhiker we just passed. He was dressed like a cowboy.
A cowboy? Cool! Let's go back! Maybe he has a horse!
If he had a horse, he wouldn't be hitchhiking. As Jaden spoke, I noticed the same cowboy standing by the road ahead of us. There he is again.
Who?
The cowboy. I looked into the side mirror as we drove on, searching for the cowboy, but there was no one there. That's so weird.
I know you are, but what am I?
I took a swat at Jaden in the back seat. As I looked out the back window, I noticed the cowboy standing directly behind the car, watching us drive away. Look, there he is again! Jaden popped up like a little prairie dog to go look out the back window, but the cowboy had disappeared. We sat in awkward silence for several minutes. I knew what they were thinking. I was crazy. For a moment, I thought they might be right. Then I saw the cowboy again. He was far ahead enough that I was certain they'd see him. You see him this time, right? We drove past the cowboy, but neither my uncle nor my brother said anything. Ahead, Joe pointed to a sign for an old ghost town. There was a banner below the sign announcing the town was hosting a craft fair.
Look, a fair. That would be fun. Let's stop off and stretch our legs. I bet they have food. A snack might do us some good.
We pulled into the parking lot a short time later. For a town in the middle of nowhere, there were quite a few people attending the fair. I tried to ignore what happened on the road, but everywhere I looked, men were dressed in the same clothes as the cowboy I saw on the road, down to the red handkerchief. I started to question my own sanity. Was it coincidence that so many men were dressed the same? And was the man I saw along the road actually several men, all dressed alike, heading to the same fair? As I was lost in thought, Uncle Joe was buying us each a corn on the cob. He handed me a cob, but it wasn't until I felt the burning sting of hot butter rolling down my arm did I register that he was talking to me. What was that?
We're gonna sit at the bench over there. Are you coming?
I slowly nodded. I guess I was still mesmerized by all the cowboys. Jaden was talking with a cowboy not too far from the food stand. Beside the cowboy stood a beautiful black horse. My brother loved horses and always wanted to learn how to ride.
Jaden!
Jaden ended his conversation. As he walked away, so did the cowboy and his horse, revealing the same mysterious cowboy I saw on the road. When I saw the cowboy, I jumped back, startled. The corn cob flew from my hand, but I managed to catch it before it hit the ground. When I looked back at the cowboy, he had vanished. I took a seat beside Jaden, whose face was covered in butter and corn kernels. He was going on and on about the cowboy and the horse he met. Uncle Joe sat on the other side of the picnic table, watching me with concern.
Hey, I was thinking, you guys have been cooped up in the car for the past 3 days. We should stop off in Santa Cruz tomorrow. Maybe we can go to the beach and rent some bikes. I hear they have a boardwalk with an amazing roller coaster. I'm sure your dad wouldn't mind a short delay.
Seriously? That would be awesome!
Alex, what do you say?
I didn't answer. I had noticed the mysterious cowboy again, standing near one of the log buildings. I stood and walked cautiously over to the man, unsure at this point if he would still be there by the time I reached him. I grew closer, my hands trembling as I reached out to touch him. When I did, I realized it was an enlarged photo attached to particle board. I began to laugh hysterically. Oh my God, I'm such an idiot.
What are you doing?
It's a sign. All those cowboys I saw along the road. They must have been signs advertising this place. It makes perfect sense. I mean, how could anyone run faster than a car, right? I paused when I noticed my uncle's jaw drop. He pointed to the log cabin's open door. Inside the cabin was a museum dedicated to the family that founded the town. Along the back wall was a mural of the family, the same cowboy, along with his 6 children. Then Uncle Joe pointed to the image of his wife. I paused in shock. It was like I was looking directly into a mirror. The cowboy's wife looked exactly like me. I turned back to the doorway of the cabin, seeing the cowboy standing by the door. He tipped his hat, then disappeared. My friend Maddie and I always used to love the annual carnival in our hometown. We were just teenagers at the time, but the both of us had been going there every year since we were 10. It would have continued that way too, if it wasn't for him. I lived in the far end of the town, opposite to Maddie's, whereas she practically lived next door. This meant at the end of the night, I would always have to trek back through the miles of cars sat waiting in the parking lot until I eventually found my parents. If only we had parked closer. At the start of the last carnival, Maddie and I met up within just 5 minutes of me arriving, regardless of the crowds of thousands whirling about the place like an ocean of chaos. Oh my God, Tara, how are you? Maddie ran up to me the moment we locked eyes and hugged me tightly. I'm so great, Maddie. I've missed you. It's been a whole month since school ended now. I hugged her back even tighter. Struggling for breath, we released each other and started giggling with anticipation for the night ahead. Are you ready? Maddie started to jump about, her blood vessels pumping with adrenaline. Of course I was cut off by the sound of my phone ringing. I swiftly took it out my pocket to see who was calling me. Who's that? She asked as she stopped jumping, leaning in. No clue. It says no caller ID. Who cares? Just answer it. She grabbed my phone and pressed the accept button. Snatching it back from her, we giggled and pressed the speaker button. Maddie and I kept listening for about 30 seconds, waiting for some kind of voice to follow, but nothing. Only the sound of heavy breathing and the distant noises of rides and screams coming from the distance. We looked at one another. Our eyes were filled with utter confusion, and the noises had planted a seed of unease within us both. Unnerved, I hung up. Who was that? Maddie asked. Her eyes bubbled a little with anxiety. I looked at her, shaking my head to indicate I had no clue, and then twisted my neck down at the phone screen. There was another call coming through. Again, no caller ID. This time, I decided to turn my phone on silent and hide it away. Come on, we should get going. The carnival isn't open all night. I tried to reassure Maddie that everything was fine and that we should enjoy the rest of our night. One call didn't deserve to ruin it. She smiled nervously, but soon enough, we were back in action, dancing around, hopping on ride after ride until our stomachs felt sick with adrenaline and excitement. The entire night, I could feel my phone buzzing, but I wouldn't dare tell Maddie. She was as terrified as it was. I didn't need to make matters any worse. Eventually, we grew tired of the nightly thrills and the soaring heights of the carnival rides. After grabbing some food, which consisted of 2 hot dogs and 1 cotton candy, we hugged each other goodbye, signaling the end of our adventure together that night. But it wasn't the end of mine. As we parted, I began to walk towards the car park, which was just a few minutes on the other side of the food stands. As I wandered, I pulled out my phone and realized my dad had been calling me. But to my utter horror, as I went to accept the call from my dad suddenly ended and was replaced by no caller ID. It was too late. The breathing was back. This time, however, before I hung up again, I could hear the sounds of the carnival echoing through the phone. The breathing, too, had grown in volume, sounding far more grotesque. I could even make out the dripping sound of drool. In an instant, I hung up again, but this time, I found the no caller ID number, finally blocking it. For a moment, I felt relieved. So much so that at once I could feel my veins throbbing with joy after a wonderful evening out with my friend. I continued on my journey back to the car. Once at the edge of the carnival, I started across the vast expanses of the car park before me. A feeling of dread suddenly lurched over me. I knew where my parents were, as we parked in the same spot every single time I came to the carnival. Only this time, the walk to the other side felt so much longer. Breathing in, I took my first step into the great abyss of cars in front of me and began weaving my way through, row by row, gradually making my way towards my parents, towards safety. I had been walking for around 5 minutes when I went to check my phone. I switched it on, checking that there were no more calls coming through. To my delight, there were none. But to my horror, there was still breathing. This time, the breathing was real. I swiveled my head around and locked eyes with a man dressed in a black hoodie, the hood dangling over his eyes, revealing only his grin. He was staring at me from the other side of a car. My blood abruptly infused with an overwhelming surge of fear as I backed away. My parents weren't far away. I had to run. Suddenly, the man burst to life, sprinting at me from around the front of the car. In response, I dashed away, swerving past cars, screaming for help. The carnival hadn't yet even reached its peak, so there was nobody else in the car park. That meant that if my parents were sat waiting where they usually were, this creep would catch up to me. And then who knows what. But as I hurled myself past the final row of cars, I saw them. I was saved. I shrieked for them to help me, causing them to look up. At first, confused, but the instant they saw me being chased, my dad's eyes visibly burned with rage as he burst out of the car, charging towards the man behind me, who I saw was now running, approaching him fast. As for my mom, I ran into her arms, squeezing her tightly as tears flooded down my flushed cheeks and panting mouth. I heard the sound of a body being flung into the car, then collapsing to the floor. I swiveled around to see my dad stood over the creep's unconscious body with some blood pouring out from his head. Later on, once the police had arrived, we had discovered, after lifting the man's hood back, that it was actually one of my dad's friends. That explained how he had my number. We were appalled to hear the next week that he had been planning this for over a month after he came around to ours for dinner. He didn't seem all that dangerous then. To this day, I wonder what made him change. Yet at the same time, I despise him. I messaged Maddie explaining what happened after the police report was filed. I told her I'd never return to the carnival again. If it was really that easy, who knows who could do the same.
Christmas is usually a time of peace and joy, but sometimes it's a time when the strangest and most horrific things can happen. The story is from when I was a kid. At that time, I couldn't defend myself. I couldn't run away from home or call the police. At that time, I could only depend on my parents to protect me. And the moment they couldn't do it, I came face to face with death and almost didn't survive to tell the story. Truth be told, Christmas didn't used to be my favorite holiday. Make no mistake, I enjoyed the presents, the food, and the arrival of Santa Claus. But since my whole family was quite young and my parents had me when they were very young, I was the only boy in the family, except for my oldest aunt who had a baby. This was really very boring, since the party where the children were supposed to enjoy the most turned into a boring family dinner for adults. After we all gathered at the table to eat, I went to the dining room to play alone. And that's when it all started. At that moment, I thought maybe I had seen too many horror movies, but I could have sworn I saw someone through the window, as if a shadow had run past. I approached the window to get a better look, but I couldn't see anything. I thought maybe it was my imagination. Behind the window was a man with a terrifying demon mask. The mask had a huge grin on it. From behind the window, the man tapped on it slowly and pointed to the front door. As a kid, my first impulse was to walk away slowly. The man turned his head in disappointment. After that, he left the window and went in the direction of the front door. A few seconds later, someone started banging on it.
That must be Henry with the beer. I'll go get it. Dad, don't open it! It's not Uncle Henry! It's a man in a demon mask! What are you talking about? Have you lost your mind, Joshua? It's your uncle. There was just a man at the window with a demon mask. I swear it's not Uncle Henry.
Hesitantly, my dad went to the door and looked through the peephole. After doing so, he raised his head and opened the door. My first instinct was to run away, but I stopped when I saw a familiar face. It was my Uncle Henry, just like my dad said.
Josh just mistook you for a demon.
I knew I shouldn't have got that haircut.
Dad, I'm serious. There was a man with a mask in the window. Josh, I know you're bored, but you can't scare adults like that. You always do that. I'm serious this time, I swear.
Without listening to me anymore, my dad had gone back to the kitchen with my uncle to put the beer away. I don't know how much I could blame him for not believing me. As a kid, I used to make up imaginary friends. And that night, my dad was a little too drunk. I was very scared of this man, so I decided to continue playing in my room, going upstairs. Just in case, I locked the door with a chair. I spent a few minutes bored, knowing that at midnight my parents would come to pick me up to watch the fireworks. but I started to fall asleep. I didn't think I could stay awake a minute longer.
Josh, come down! It's already midnight. They're shooting fireworks.
From my bedroom window overlooking the courtyard, I could see beautiful fireworks covering the whole sky. I stared out my window. My family was already outside, watching the huge amount of lights in the sky. Suddenly, someone started banging on my door.
Coming!
I was about to open it when I realized something. I looked out the window again. There's Mom, Dad, the uncles, grandparents. They're all downstairs. Then, who's banging at the door?
Kid, could you open the door for me, please? I just want to talk.
It's you! The guy with the mask! Get out of here or I'll tell my parents!
Oh, you don't want to do that. I'll be very angry.
Desperate, I opened the window and shouted to my parents.
Dad! Mom! Help! There's someone trying to get in my room!
At that moment, my parents got scared and tried to open the backyard door, but they couldn't do it. It was locked. Someone locked it from the inside. They started kicking it in desperation. Meanwhile, the voice behind me got louder and louder.
Didn't you hear me? I told you I would be angry!
Get out of here! I'm not opening it!
Oh, come on, Josh. You'll like where I'm taking you. It's full of children's corpses you can play with.
Help!
Josh, you know what I did to them all? I strangled them. I did the same thing I'm going to do to you. I squeezed their necks with my huge hands and watched their lives go.
While he was saying this, the man with the mask was about to break the door. I saw the wood begin to break little by little. It wouldn't resist much longer. I looked out the window again. My whole family was still trying to break into the house any way they could. My father grabbed a rock and threw it at the window outside, breaking it. At that moment, the pounding in my room stopped. I looked back at the door. There was no one trying to break it, but someone was still behind it.
You know, Joshua, I've been watching you for weeks. When you get out of school, when you hang out at your friend Steven's house, when you go swimming. I could kill you whenever I want. I just wanted to do it at Christmas, to make it special, like I did with the other boys.
While the man was talking, I heard my dad come in through the broken window and shout from below.
Josh!
Next time I see you, little boy, I'll make sure it's not special. You're going to suffer a lot.
The voice was gone. A few seconds later, my father came up the stairs and into my room. A few seconds later, my mother and my aunt and my uncle came in. This time, no one doubted my story, as they all saw how someone tried to force my door open. When the police arrived, I listened as my father told them everything that had happened. At that moment, the psychopath not only took advantage of the fireworks to get in, but locked the door from the inside. After hearing the story, the cops assumed that everything was planned for me to stay in the house with him. All he had to do was watch us and wait for the moment to strike. And that's exactly what happened. After that, I didn't leave the house for weeks. There was always someone with me, and the police were always around. One night in February, the police came to my house telling me that they had caught the man. He called himself the Grinch, and as he told me, he was guilty of many disappearances of children my age, whose bodies turned up buried in his yard. The motive for the killings? He just wanted to make a name for himself, and thought there'd be nothing more shocking than killing children. Nothing was the same from that day on. Many years later, I still go to the psychiatrist because of that man. Every time I sleep, I dream about what would have happened if I hadn't locked the door to my room. I dream of him hanging me as promised. I dream that I'm a boy again and he comes looking for me at my school. I dream that once again, I'm helpless. He may be condemned to life in prison, but at the same time, he is still with me, and I feel that he always will be. Christmas is usually a time of love, a time of peace, and a time of happiness, where everyone shares gifts and eats a big dinner together. I'm not gonna lie. I took the mall Santa job because I needed money. But seeing all those smiling children asking me for presents made me much happier than I thought I'd be. In those moments of happiness, I didn't think my life was at risk. I never thought I would meet someone who never enjoyed Christmas. That day was not unlike the previous days I had spent at the mall. The children would turn away from their parents when they were a few feet away from me and join the line to come with me. As cheerful as they were, they all asked me for the same thing: a bicycle, a video game console, or a dollhouse. All things that parents could get in this very mall. Of course, there were some kids who asked for weird things. I remember on that day, one kid was asking me for a live dinosaur so he could raise it in his backyard. Normally I would have laughed inside, but something else was occupying my attention. While the boy was talking to me, I couldn't take my eyes off a man standing a few feet away, looking at me impatiently from behind a pillar. The man was very tall and thin. His eyes were tiny, so tiny that they seemed to be lost in his huge cratered face. Although it was obvious he was there, he watched me as if I didn't see him. At first, I thought his gaze was filled with hatred, but as I got a better look, I realized it wasn't that. He was anxious and impatient. But why? What did this man want from me?
Santa, are you listening?
Oh, I'm sorry, son. Of course. What else do you want?
I also want a big cave so I can keep the dinosaur.
I got so distracted I forgot I was still with a child. When I finished listening to him and looked up again, the man behind the pillar was gone. I looked around and he seemed to be gone. A few hours later, I had finished my shift and was going to change. Have you ever wondered what's inside all those doors in the mall that only authorized personnel can go through? Inside are the hallways connecting all the stores in the mall, along with private restrooms and maintenance areas. I entered through one of the doors and went to one of the locker rooms to change. I sat down and tried to take off my fake Santa Claus beard, but before I could do so, someone opened the door. It was the man who was watching me earlier. The man was peeking through my door, watching me like he was watching me before behind the pillar. Timidly, he entered the room and closed the door, still watching me with an obsessive but timid look.
Hey, what are you doing here? This is for authorized personnel only. You work here?
Hey, Santa. Is this where you came from before you went to the North Pole?
What are you talking about? Do you think...
You haven't heard what I want for Christmas yet. When he got close to me, I noticed a lot of things I didn't notice before. His clothes were full of condiments, his hair was badly groomed, and his look, I knew that look. I had seen it many times. It was the look of a child. The man was behaving like a child. Before I could draw any more conclusions, the man sat down on my knees without giving me time to react. Once on top of me, he slowly brought his face close to mine and began to speak. I'm sorry I came all this way, Santa Claus. All the kids always look at me funny in the line. Besides, I wanted you all to myself.
Yes, I understand. Well, what do you want for Christmas?
I know many people would have fought. Others would have run away, cried, or anything but play along. But what choice did I have? I had never been in a fight in my life. He was clearly much more imposing than me. And to top it off, he was totally crazy. I didn't know what he was capable of.
For this Christmas, I want something much better than all the other kids. I want a lot of bicycles. I want a robot. I also want a TV.
While he was talking to me, I could only hold back my tears. I was terrified for my life. For the moment, I had it under control. But who knows how this man might behave? What if this was all a lie? What if he was a killer pretending to be a child to torture me before killing me? I cleared my head of all thoughts. At this point, it no longer made any sense to imagine the worst. I focused on the man again, and when I did, I wished I was still trapped in my thoughts. Hey, Santa, can you tell me why my parents are dead?
Oh, look, it's hard to explain.
Every Christmas, I ask you for things, but you never bring them to me. You took my parents away from me when I was a kid, and I've been in the doctor's house for years. I don't want the bicycle anymore. I want you to bring me my parents.
Look, if your parents are dead, I don't think they can...
Before I finished the sentence, I noticed that something was wrong. The air was thicker. My body felt stiffer. Suddenly, I was overcome with a feeling of terror that I never had before. As I looked at the man's face, it had changed. He was furious. He no longer had that childlike expression. He now looked like a monster. His eyes were frozen on me. His head was shaking, and even though this month was closed, I could feel his teeth grinding. At that moment, I realized what was about to happen. His hands were stiff and open, ready for a quick move. I knew if I gave the wrong answer, I was going to die.
Listen, I think I can get your parents back, and long before Christmas. You just have to wait for me in this room. I'll come and get them.
I made a move to stand up, and he stood up with me. He wasn't answering me anymore. He was just staring at me. Very scared, I walked towards the door without losing sight of him. He didn't stand still. He was following me.
Hey, you can't come with me, okay? Children can't see Santa's magic. Just wait for me here.
Ignoring me, he kept walking behind me. Each step felt more oppressive than the last. I felt like at any moment he was going to jump at me. He was going to attack me and do who knows what. My body was numb and I felt like I was dying inside. Once I got to the door, he stopped. I opened it slowly, but he slammed it shut and stared at me. His face was in front of mine once again. I did my best not to cry, to hold my nerves and just handle the situation as best I could. After a few seconds, the man took his hand off the door and let me go. Once he did this, I ran as fast as I could. I alerted the police and I ran home, crying. The nightmare was over. The next day, I asked the police officer at the mall what had happened, and he told me everything. Once they got to the room, he was there, waiting. He put up no resistance and was arrested. And shortly after, he was taken to the nearby mental hospital from which he had escaped after beating a guard to death during the night. As they took him away, all he did was ask if Santa had lied to him. Since the cops didn't answer him, he grimaced in anger and kept walking. That was my last day as a mall Santa. As far as I know, the man is probably still in the psychiatric hospital, but imagine if he escapes. The first thing he'll do is get revenge on Santa Claus for lying to him. And when that happens, I don't want to be inside that costume.
Our friendship was ending. Okay, perhaps that's a tad overdramatic. Most of my friend group was just moving to different cities for university. No one but Ash was going to stay in our small hometown. It was a bit sad. We were so used to hanging out whenever any of us had some free time. Things would never be the same like before, and that's exactly why we decided to try and throw one last party. This is gonna be the best party ever! Ash boasted as we sat on her living room floor. We'd blown up what seemed like hundreds of balloons and poured at least 50 glasses of champagne for the 7 of us. Was it excessive? Yes. But it was our last New Year's Eve together, the last big hurrah before we'd separate. Preparing for it was half the fun. Only Moira and Maria hadn't arrived by then yet. They both had work. I couldn't wait for them to finally get to the party so we could start. It was weird, though, I had to admit, knowing that after this night, nothing would quite be the same. Ash didn't seem to be thinking as hard as I was, though. In fact, she was focusing on pre-gaming. She had already had 3 beers or more, and, well, she was buzzed. But I appreciated her attitude. I wanted to forget about what was going on, too. Leia was in the kitchen, working on the last few dishes for the big goodbye dinner. She was going to study to be a chef, so it made a lot of sense that she'd take charge in the kitchen to some extent. I was broken out of my thoughts by the doorbell ringing. "Let us in!" Moira's voice was playful but loud. Ash rushed to do so. Mariah was behind her, carrying some booze. I'm glad you guys could make it. Dinner's about to start soon. I'll go see if I can help Leia with the setting of the table. I hugged the girls quickly before scurrying off to the kitchen. I was quite hungry, so I really couldn't wait. But when I stepped into the small, cozy space, Leia wasn't there. Leia? My voice was louder than I'd wanted it to be. It was silly, but for some reason, dread settled into my stomach. Did she leave without telling us? And why would she leave the oven on if that was the case? Guys, has anyone seen Leia? I asked. I turned to the only guy in our group, Tim, who'd been in the living room for a while. He was browsing his phone with an almost bored expression. Still, when I sat down in front of him, he flinched a little.
Nope, I thought she was still cooking. Maybe she needed to go to the bathroom or something.
Just when he said that, I heard a door slam behind someone. Guys, I think you want to come here for a sec. What the? I think she was taken. Somehow. Mariah was always the one to jump to conclusions like that, but, well, I tried not to think so far just yet. I mean, it had to be a prank, right? Come on. We both know how silly she can get. I bet she's hiding in the cupboards or something stupid like that. Leia, come out. You got us. We're hungry now, so... Ash started to panic, and on the inside, so was I. Tim popped up from the couch, a sneaky grin on his lips.
I bet she's playing hide and seek. Let's go look for her all over the house.
Moira was the one to head to the kitchen first. Her voice sounded almost strained, as if she was, "Guys, you need to come here." She found Leia. And Leia was not okay. I wanted to cry. But I knew that that wasn't the right thing to do. Maybe we can still... Someone call an ambulance, okay? Right now! I was studying to be a doctor. I knew a lost cause when I saw one. But what had happened? She was clearly... Ash didn't finish her sentence. She fiddled with her beer bottle in her hands, clearly having lost the drive to drink. I was the same. I wanted nothing but to curl up and cry. We should still contact the authorities and then get out of here, I decided after a moment. That was the best plan of action. I felt like I was switching off my emotions to try and focus on what we needed to do, but my heart was breaking and my mind so fearful. That's when the lights went off and Moira screamed at the top of her lungs. It was silent for a few seconds, and then Moira was gone too. One by one, we were being hunted down. We need to get away from here. I'll call the cops from outside. I tried to take control of the situation, but Maria was inconsolable. She was shaking, clutching Moira's hands in hers as she sobbed. "Yeah, we need to go," Ash muttered, but she didn't look too good. Wobbly in her feet, she opted to lean against the wall. I made a break for it on my own, rushing to the door as fast as I could. Maybe if I went, the others would follow suit. But that didn't happen. I was the only one to leave the house. The door was open, but no one else came after me. I could hear Ash and Maria sobbing. They were all right, but it felt like I was in some weird sort of nightmare. I needed to go back, but first, the cops needed to be called, and why was I shaking so badly? Why couldn't I try and help my friends when someone was clearly after them? It took me minutes to run back. With the police on the way, I felt like I would be fine. But that was a lie. The lights were off again. Ash was still sitting in front of the wall, her eyes wide open, but clearly unseen. She didn't look fine. Maria was gone from the scene. I didn't have to think twice about what had happened to her. And then I saw him. Tim smiled at me, stalking towards me with a wide grin. He didn't seem the least bothered by what had happened. If anything, he seemed delighted. I realized it'd all been him. "Why?" I asked, desperate to actually know. I stepped right back into his trap, so I deserved to, at least.
I couldn't lose all of you. I'd rather us all go together.
His voice sent a shudder down my spine. He was quite serious. And there was nothing else I could do. My teeth chattered together loudly as I stood on top of the mountain, bare hands raised towards the sky. Yes, there's a signal! I could have cried, but my tears had long run out. With shaky hands, I pressed a few buttons on my phone, jumping upwards slightly as the familiar beep played again and again. No, what the? I was lost, confused, and angry. Why? Why wasn't it working when it looked fine? Just an hour ago, I couldn't have cared less if my phone misbehaved. Skiing has always been a huge part of my life, and I was so happy to finally have a free weekend to just have fun with my friends in the mountains. John and Tia had a cabin near one of the lesser-known paths, so we often holed up there on long winter nights, toasting marshmallows on the open fire and just hanging out. We will never be able to do that again, not with... I shook my head. I've always talked to myself out loud when I was stressed, but this wasn't safe. Not with him hot on my track. I could hear him searching for me still. His voice was warm, a near welcome distraction from the icy wind.
Come on, sweetheart. You know that I know exactly where you are. Wouldn't it be easier for you to just come down here? Struggling doesn't look good on you.
Just an hour ago, I didn't even know that he existed. I mean, sure, I've heard of dangerous people lurking in the mountains before, especially after dark, but I'd never encountered anything worse than a spooked moose or a lost tourist who was desperate to find their way back to the official trails. I didn't want to think about what happened in the past 60 minutes. My shaking hands, clad in gloves, were soaked red. I tried to save Sandra, I really did. But if I'd stayed with her, he'd have found me faster. The sound of a snapping twig broke me out of my thoughts. It wasn't him. I felt lucky somehow, though it was a small wolf that stared me in the eyes. Where there are cubs, there's also adults. However, who knew with him around? He seemed to be quite fond of hunting. After all, a shaky breath was drawn from my lungs again as I tried to keep an ear out for him. Based on his humming, he was still quite a bit away. Jordan had tried to outrun him.
I'll be fine, guys. Just give me a few minutes and I'll end this nightmare. Don't worry.
That was the last thing I heard him say. How ironic, right? But I still had so much hope in him. I mean, he was the only one who could become a hero out of all of us. Jordan's always been good at every single sport he's tried. Scarily good, really. He had a good head start, too, shouting at us that he'd get help, that he'd save us. He followed Jordan like a stalking beast did with its prey. Jokingly, he mused if Jordan could outrun bullets. He couldn't. It took us a few minutes to realize, though. I remember cheering, feeling like we were saved. There was no way Jordan wouldn't get away, right? And yet he didn't. He knew the mountains like the back of his hands, but that wasn't enough. None of us were enough. We tried to plead with him. We tried to threaten him. None of that worked. I managed to slip away, though now I wonder if he'd meant to let me go. It's clear that he does like a chase. But there has to be a way for me to win. I just don't know what to do. I can't call home, and I certainly can't run any further. I'm so tired. But I really don't want to give up. Still, there has to be a way, right? It's funny because a bit more than an hour ago, I'd never thought I would be up here on my own. I was back in the cabin with the others, laughing at the stupid jokes Jordan liked to crack. I remember I was all cozied up by the fire, flipping through some old books we'd brought to the cabin. It was tradition to pretend that we would have a bunch of downtime. My thoughts were interrupted by another crack.
Look at you. You're even standing still for me.
This time, it was him. When he first knocked on the door, we didn't think anything weird of him. After all, he looked like a pretty chill guy wearing a red coat and some dark boots. He looked unassuming, though perhaps a little unkempt. Messy hair didn't really matter in the mountains. He must have kept an eye on us for a while by then. He just knew how to earn our trust.
Sorry, guys. I just want a cup of hot cocoa and a minute of rest. After that, I'll get going.
Thinking about it later, he'd never made requests, just demands. He sounded confident, though perhaps a bit eccentric, but not to the point where we found him to be suspicious. But then, he got Claire to help him check out his gear, out of earshot in the forest. Why we let her go with him on her own, I still don't know, but all I understood was that she never returned. I wondered if I was somehow numb now. Fear still clear in my heart. I could barely stop my entire body from shaking violently. I'd never felt so sick before. But as I stared straight into his eyes, I didn't really struggle. Why us? I mustered to ask, finally. The adrenaline that had kept me going only a minute prior was slowly subsiding, causing me to feel numb. He didn't reply for a short while, but I could almost hear him ramble about hatred or revenge or something of the sort. Something that could justify what he'd done. Anything that could explain why us and not someone else. He shrugged. That's the last thing I heard before a loud, deafening bang.
You were in the right place at the right time.
And then, it all went black.
Have you ever been caught in a snowstorm? No one can get in touch with you. You don't know when the storm will stop or if someone will come to your rescue. Sounds like a horrible experience, doesn't it? Now, imagine that not only are you in that situation, but there is someone out there. Someone who not only can handle the snow, but is more comfortable with it. Someone who you know if he catches you, no one could ever save you from him. Like all stories, this one doesn't start off badly. I was on a winter vacation with my family. We were going to the family cabin for the weekend. Against all odds, it was snowing that day, but not hard enough to be a problem. I arrived with my wife and 2 children at the cabin and settled in. To our surprise, the snow was getting worse, but we were safe inside the cabin. We were sitting around drinking hot chocolate after dinner. To my surprise, my cell phone rang. I had been without signal for the last few hours, so those moments of signal surprised me and updated my phone with a bunch of notifications. I looked at them out of curiosity, and I must admit that my chocolate almost fell out of my hands. The notifications were from my father. He was telling me that he was feeling very bad. Then I received several messages from my mother saying that she had to call the ambulance and that my father had been hospitalized. At that moment, I didn't even hesitate. I had to go to the hospital and check on him. My wife told me that she and my kids would come with me, but even though the snowfall had calmed down a bit, it still seemed too unsafe to expose them to it. In a snowfall, the road is treacherous, and no matter how concentrated I was, there could always be accidents.
Are you sure you'll be all right? I don't want you to be alone, especially if something happens to your father.
Don't worry, honey. My mother already told me he's out of danger, but I'd still like to keep him company. Don't worry, I'll be back when the kids wake up.
If it gets serious with your father, promise to come and get us, okay? It's just a silly vacation. We can come back anytime.
I promise. Seriously, don't worry about me. And I'm sorry for leaving you alone with the kids. With that said, I got into the van and started my trip to the hospital. I had a few miles to go, but even though it was snowing, it was still a smooth ride. At first, I didn't have any problems. I'm a truck driver. Believe me, I've been on worse roads than this. But as the minutes passed, the snow started to get heavier. The falling snow covered part of my window, and even though the wipers cleaned it, the glass was automatically covered with snow again. Concentrating on watching the road, I kept an eye out for everything ahead. But to my surprise, I saw something else. A very large being with white hair crossed the road at an enormous speed. Was it a snow-covered animal? Maybe my eyes were playing tricks on me. There was no way any animal could be traveling that fast while freezing. I admit that I lost my concentration for a few seconds trying to figure out what I had seen, and those seconds cost me dearly.
No!
Oh my god. What was that? Oh, this is just great. Of course there's no signal. From 1 second to the next, everything had become chaos. I was trapped on the side of the road with the car stuck in the middle of a snowfall that was getting more and more intense. And to top it off, no cell phone. Just when I thought it couldn't get any worse, I felt a roar in the distance. Something was coming from far away, screaming wildly towards where I was. I couldn't see anything. All the windows were covered in ice. Suddenly, something very strong hit the car from the front. The glass didn't shatter by a miracle, but the car went back a few centimeters. What could be so strong as to move a car like that? Had another car hit me? Or was there something alive attacking me? As if in answer to my question, something leaped onto the roof of my vehicle, plunging it and almost driving a broken metal into my head. Something was on top of me. Whatever it was hitting the roof of the van, driving it deeper and deeper. I could feel a huge, violent roar from outside. My only reaction was to stay under the back seat in the fetal position, frozen with fear and crying. After a few seconds, the pounding stopped. Was it all over? I turned around and tried to start the car one more time. Maybe the push that beast had given me had brought me out of the snow. As soon as I started the engine, the windshield wipers worked again and defrosted the front glass. It was a monster. There was some kind of snow gorilla on the front window. The giant beast violently hit the glass of my car over and over again. I put the van in reverse. It was still stuck, but now at least it was moving slowly. As I got out of the snow, I watched as the glass of the van began to crack as the beast hit it harder and harder. Once I made it back to the road, the glass exploded into pieces, and a huge hand grabbed my hand and threw me out of the van. My first reaction was to get up and crawl under the van before the beast had time to catch me. The beast didn't like this, and it went crazy and started hitting my van harder, trying to flip the van. I crawled out the other side of the van and climbed through the broken front window. By the time the beast noticed me and tried to catch me, it was too late. I started the vehicle and stepped on the gas pedal as fast as I could. The huge animal held onto the back of the van for a few seconds, but unable to keep up, it let go and chased me on foot for a few meters before giving up and looking at me as I drove away. After all that happened, my van was in the direction of the cabin, so I went back to it and hid with my family. My children were sleeping, but my wife was awake, and when she saw me beaten up and the truck destroyed, she thought I had been in an accident. At first, she didn't believe the Yeti story, but when she saw the bumps on the van, she had no choice but to believe me. We spent the whole night in the cabin, scared, waiting for daylight. As soon as the sun came up, the storm had stopped. I told my mother that I had been in an accident and couldn't go, and she told me that my father was out of danger. That same day, I asked my brother to pick us up since my vehicle had been destroyed. I never went to that cabin again. Whether or not you think the videos of beasts in the snow are fake, be careful driving at night, especially if there is snowfall. You never know what kind of creatures may be lurking on the road, waiting to prey on their next victims.
Hey, I'm going to that meeting with corporate I told you about. You're acting manager until I get back, okay?
Got it, boss. Good luck.
Thanks.
but I won't need it. I hate this song. Today on Background Chit Chat, we'll be talking about the importance of scrubbing your toilet bowl on a regular basis. Ew, no, anything but that.
Hey, you! Yeah, you! Are you headed towards your doom? Then you need the all-new, new and improved, upgraded deluxe opponent repellent.
You know what? How about silence then? Come on, people, I got somewhere to be. Jeez, this guy is impatient. Bad traffic. We'll be there soon. Huh. Dramatic much? Maybe I should have just walked. No, that would have been suspicious. Who walks to a meeting with corporate? Huh. Who is this guy anyway? What exactly am I getting myself into? I mean, what kind of guy calls himself the Kingmaker? That's what my son would call cringe, I think. Honestly, I'd call it that too. Oh well. I just hope his burgers are half as good as he claims. Alright, looks like I'm here. This is it? Which one am I supposed to go to? Unit 3 it is then.
Whoa! What the? Who are you?
Ha ha ha! Gotcha, didn't I? That's just a cheap costume. I'm the Kingmaker.
Oh, well, I'm glad to finally meet you in person, Mr. Kingmaker.
Leave all the formalities at the door and come inside.
Okay then. Thank you.
Please, have a seat. We have much to discuss.
That's right. You're supposed to get me ahead of the Burger Patty game so I can beat out all the other franchises in the area. How exactly do you plan on doing that again?
With higher quality beef, of course.
So I just have to use your patties instead of the ones the supply chain sends me, and then everybody will start to notice that my burgers taste better than all the other Burger Kings?
Yeah, exactly.
But what makes your patties any better than the regular ones? How do you make them?
That's a trade secret, of course.
Well, how will I even know if they're any good?
Come on! Don't take me for a crook! I'm gonna let you try one for yourself, of course. I assure you that this is 100% standard Burger King burger, except for my patty. Go ahead, eat it.
This better be good. Hey, that's pretty good. They're actually really good. And here I thought you were going to try and sell me a McDonald's burger. Listen, if you can really provide enough of these patties to service my whole restaurant, then we got a deal.
So you like it, yes? I'm very pleased.
I know I already asked, but you gotta tell me. How did you do this?
Well, if you insist, I'll show you. But first, I must explain.
Explain what?
What I'm doing here. I want to make the best burger that has ever existed, and I'm willing to do anything to make that happen. And when I say anything, I mean anything. Hey, watch it. You run the Burger King, don't you? That makes you the Burger King, does it not? You are in charge of the burgers, so you are their king.
I mean, sure, that's one way to put it, but...
What the hell is this? Never mind that. Listen to me. In order to create the best burger in the world, I must use you, the Burger King. Your knowledge, your expertise, your discerning taste. I want to create the king of burgers. The Burger King burger.
You know that every burger we sell is technically a Burger King burger.
Shut up! That's not what I'm talking about. I want to make the burger of the Burger King.
Hey, let go of me.
I don't know what you're talking about. I'm sorry. I know what I'm trying to do doesn't make sense to most. I know you are the Burger King, so you have your own way of doing things.
Well, I'm more like a Burger King.
But you admit it, yes? You are the Burger King.
Sure.
And the burger I made, it was a good burger?
Yeah, it was. The best one I've had in a while.
Then I'd like to show you my process.
Really? I thought you said it was a trade secret.
Forget about all that. Follow me.
Whoa, you're not messing around. You really can produce enough to power a whole restaurant.
I told you I was serious about my venture. Would you like to take a look at the machinery?
Well, the thing is, I don't have anything to do with the meat grinding. That all happens before the meat gets to me. I don't have anything to do with it.
Aren't you the slightest bit curious?
I guess I'm a little bit curious.
Then go ahead and take a look.
All right then, I will. What's the meaning of this? What's going on?
I told you, Burger King, I want to make a Burger King burger. Stop this, please, let me go. Shut up, you'll make a great patty. General managers disappear all the time around here. Haven't you ever noticed?
What? No, please!
Ah!
That smells so good. Just 2 years ago, towards the end of middle school, my best friend Abby and I were involved in what at first seemed like a vicious prank, only to then be put in the claws of death itself, all because of one night. I try to recall the tragedy now, but my memory of it has been clouded by the rot of time. This is all I can remember. It was a Wednesday night deep into late autumn. Abby and I were having yet another sleepover, not wanting to be alone on the night of the party. The party was announced earlier that day at school, and the most popular girl in school, Sharna, was the one who had set it up. However, we were never usually invited, being cast out from most groups at school for being nobodies. We were constantly shouted at in the corridors, being called weird, ugly, dorks, you name it, we were called it. All we had was each other. All until that very same evening when we both got a text from Sharna inviting us to her party at the local carnival. Wild with excitement, we both jumped up, crying with joy as we scrambled to find some outfits. Oh my God, Sarah, can you believe it? Abby was rolling about on the floor, happiness glowing from her eyes. This is our chance, Abby. We can finally move past our old selves. We aren't losers anymore. Neither of us knew Sharna's or anyone else's real intentions behind that invite. We discovered afterwards that Sharna and her friends had been bored that night and decided to invite the two of us for a prank. Sharna's brother was dressed up as a clown as he worked at the carnival, and so the group decided to try and scare Abby and me, recording it for the whole school to see. Naively, we departed our house just 10 minutes after Sharna's invite. We should never have left. We arrived shortly after leaving, witnessing the carnival in all its wonder and excitement. The crowd was bustling with life and movement as the rides shone brightly in the background. There was a clamor of joy and an air of smiles as we walked through it, searching for Sharna. After around 5 or 10 minutes of looking, my eyes were set on Sharna. She was giggling with her other friends. They were standing outside the mirror maze. But as Abby and I approached and Sharna saw us, she quickly shushed the others around her, now applying a fake smile to her face. Hi, you two, she smiled and waved at us as we arrived at the group. Abby and I were far too nervous to speak. This was practically a fever dream for us. Sharna did not stop smiling. A single droplet of sweat rolled down her face. She was holding her composure. We're playing Truth or Dare. Want in? It would be awesome to have you play. She noticeably shuddered after saying that. But we ignored it. This was our chance. Sure, Abby and I spoke in unison. Sharna openly let out a giggle, triggering the others around her to do the same. I dare you to go into the mirror maze. She broke down, cackling on the floor. All her friends joined her immediately after. Abby and I looked at each other with puzzled expressions. It didn't seem like that big a deal, so we agreed. All right then, head on in. Sharna sat back up, trying with all her might to compose herself, holding her phone tightly in her right hand. She again started smiling, only the smile was hollow. As Abby and I entered the mirror maze, we heard the sound of laughter roaring in the background. We were stupefied. Why was it so funny? We wandered around for a bit, quite amazed by the sheer volume of reflections and warped versions of ourselves. It was like there were hundreds of us. Every now and again, we'd let out a small chuckle as one of us collided with a mirror. But after one instance of a collision, whilst I was helping Abby back up, our eyes grew wide with terror as we were now staring into the eyes of a clown. The clown had just appeared almost out of nowhere. It was carrying a knife that seemed to be dripping with fresh blood. Its gums were pulled back too, revealing a sharp set of moldy teeth. There was blood on those too. It stared at us, its grin widening. Drool had begun leaking from its jaws. I turned to Abby. Run! Suddenly, the clown exploded into motion, charging towards us. We darted away, crashing into mirror after mirror. As we journeyed through the maze, we began noticing blood splatters on the wall. The clown seemed multiplied. We had no idea which one was the real thing, if there even was a real thing. Soon enough, however, we finally emerged from the mirror maze, landing onto our stomachs on the wet floor below. We were surrounded by a group of cackling hyenas, with Sharna at the reins, holding a phone pointed at us. The flash was on. It was recording. Abby and I lay on the floor together, tears flooding from our eyes. We were distraught and mortified, and now humiliated too. You guys look like such babies, Sharna cackled. Suddenly, the noise all stopped, as the sound of Sharna's brother became clear, coming from behind the mirror maze.
Hey, Sharna! Where are those kids you were talking about? I don't really want to stay in there much longer. There's a load of fake blood and fake corpses scattered everywhere.
All at once, every single one of our faces, except her brother's, turned back around, facing the entrance of the mirror maze. Standing there, knife pointed at us, was the clown. An eruption of screams followed from all the kids as the clown stampeded towards us. It launched the knife in our direction, impaling itself into Sharna's leg. Sharna wailed in agony, dropping to the ground, clutching her leg tightly. Her brother was charging towards the clown. Seeing him coming, it gave us a smile, a wicked grin, and returned into the mirror maze, Sharna's brother following closely behind. Later that week, after we had all returned home and while Sharna left for the hospital, we witnessed a report on the news come out, addressing the horrors we were subjected to on that dreadful night. It was discovered by the police that the man who had been carrying the knife didn't work there, and that several other bodies were found scattered all throughout the mirror maze, stabbed to death, many with chunks of flesh having been ripped straight off their bones, with teeth marks being left in their wake. The clown in question was pursued by Sharna's brother until it jumped the fence that stood between the woods and the carnival. It vanished into the thick of the forest, leaving the knife still in Sharna's leg as the only link to the killer's identity. The video of Abby and I crying was never released, and Sharna never came back to school. Maybe it was deserved. But yesterday, now starting senior year, Abby and I saw Sharna. Her leg had been amputated, and she was glaring at us both from across the corridor. Something tells me she doesn't blame the clown, but instead, she blames us. and I think she wants revenge.
Hi, my name is Ben, and I've seen Santa, but not the Santa you imagine. It was last year, the night before Christmas, and my mother was putting me to bed. Each year, she'd always say the same thing.
Now make sure you stay in bed, honey, or Santa won't come.
I would always feel a surge of excitement ripple through me when she talked about Santa. I wanted to meet him so badly, to see him put a present under the tree, and to thank him for doing so. I always felt that Santa gave so much for so little, but if nobody ever sees him, how could they possibly thank him? It was a grave error. I should have stayed in bed. That same Christmas Eve, after I heard my parents come up from the stairs and close their door to their bedroom, I remember lying there, unable to sleep. Or rather, that I was refusing to. Instead of sleeping, I lay there imagining Santa, his great white beard flowing in the snowy wind, his red suit glowing in the moonlight, his eyes glistening with the same Christmas joy said to be infused into his gifts. He was what gave my childhood true life when the snow fell and the school days ended. I'm 12 now, so much has changed. During the night, there was a couple quiet knocks and creaks here and there, but nothing to be alarmed of. Until just after midnight, one loud bang rang out, causing me to spring up from my bed and dash to my bedroom door, opening it as I checked to my left and right, and then to my parents' door in front of me. It was locked. My whole body was consumed by joy. Perhaps it was Santa. Finally, I would get to meet him, to watch in awe as he pulled present after present from his sack, placing each one gracefully under the tree. I didn't want to wake my parents, in fear they'd tell me off for being awake. One by one, I carefully placed each foot one after the other, gradually making my way down the stairs, avoiding the creaky spots and the rickety handrail. I could hear rustling noises and subtle taps rippling through the downstairs living room. Must be him. Santa was here. Soon enough, I reached the hallway outside of the living room, but stayed standing on the last step of the stairs to avoid the risk of a creaky floorboard waking my parents. Slowly, I peered round into the pitch black, where the only light source was the dimly lit Christmas tree that glowed like a distant star in the night sky. Mesmerized by its beauty, I momentarily drifted my concern away from Santa, only to stare at the light from the tree being blocked suddenly by a large, dark figure. I squinted my eyes to try and work out what had just emerged from the darkness. Was it Santa? I had thought. The figure was visibly moving and twisting around in the darkness. I would have switched the light on, but I didn't want to wake my parents. But it wasn't necessary. The light of the Christmas tree began to glow brighter from behind the dark figure, although its white glow had turned to velvet red, revealing a large man wearing a huge red overcoat with black stripes lining his back. It was Santa, I excitedly thought. I remember thinking it was the best to quietly whisper his name to get his attention. Santa. Psst. Santa. All of a sudden, the dark figure stopped all its movements. Instead, it now slowly turned its head toward me. Santa? My eyes widened in horror as I stood there, staring at its eyes transformed from white to a blood-red glow. Its mouth opened into a grin, revealing a wide set of teeth shining in the darkness. The tree behind it began to glow brighter and brighter, revealing what I had once thought to be Santa, instead showing a figure with a grisly gray beard, a set of jagged teeth pointing out from its grinning mouth, and a pair of red eyes in a red suit, tattered and stained all over, with its fingers appearing as claws. I was frozen whilst it finished turning its head, but now it faced me. Suddenly, the grin vanished, and the creature simply stood there, glaring at me without any expression. Run, I told myself. Immediately, the creature came stampeding towards me, its weighted footsteps shaking the entire house as I scrambled up the stairs, sprinting into my room and bolting it shut behind me as my parents had done. I could hear it stomping outside of my room as well as the horrific roar it gave out, giving out both murderous intent and perhaps even hunger. It began throwing its body into my door, rapidly breaking it down. Just before it entered, I jumped into my wardrobe, closing the door just as the creature burst through, flinging bits of wood everywhere, with several shards narrowly missing my hiding spot. It dashed in following the entry and stopped in the middle of the room, its head darting all around, searching for me. I was peering through the crack in the door, watching with bated breath as the creature came to an abrupt stop with all its movements. It was facing away. Had I escaped? I breathed a mild sigh of relief, with tears of adrenaline seeping from my eyes, until I reopened them, now staring at the creature, its eyes staring at me, a grin beginning to form on its face. It had found me. Suddenly, there came the voice of my parents, bursting in through the debris of the door, screaming at Santa, his eyes flashing white. The creature's grin vanished, and it leapt out of my bedroom window. I heard a colossal stampede of stomps hurry down the street outside, along with the sounds of glass shattering on the concrete below. Finally, the house went silent. The sun had begun to rise on the horizon as I clambered out of the wardrobe, hurriedly getting up and running to my parents, hurling myself into their open arms, telling them all that I could through a flood of tears. Looking up, however, I realized neither of them were listening. Instead, there was a deathly horror present in the expression on their faces as I stared at the smashed window, at what rubble was left of it, as well as the obliterated door behind us. Then they turned to each other, alarmed. All at once, they raced me down the stairs, bursting into the living room, flicking the lights on behind them. All three of us stared in bewilderment under the tree. There sat one singular present, a black box with red ribbons tied around it. Carefully, my mother wandered over to it, picking it up and opening it. Her expression froze as she stared into the box, dropping it to the floor in shock. The open box landed, and the inside was now facing towards my father and me. Inside was a red X, and a note that read, "See you next year. Merry Christmas." I'm writing this that same following year, and it's Christmas Eve.
No matter what we went through during the year, family vacations were a tradition we always followed. Usually it was my wife and my 2 kids and me. But since no one could take care of him, this year we brought our dog Max on our vacation to the coast. At the time I hesitated to bring him, afraid that the trip would make him too anxious. Little did I know that without him, I never would have realized the danger my family and I were in. The first day passed without incident. We arrived early at the beach house we had rented, and the kids just wanted to get out of the house to go to the beach. They were euphoric, running along the seashore and building sandcastles while we were sunbathing and watching Max. We were having a great time, but as the days progressed, an unsettling feeling began to come over me. I don't know how to explain it. It felt like someone was constantly watching us. I couldn't say exactly when it started, but little by little, that feeling became stronger and stronger. I thought I was going crazy. I kept looking everywhere, thinking someone was watching us. The weirdest thing is that I only felt this since my family seemed to be having a great time, so I decided not to say anything. One night I took a walk. The kids and my wife were sound asleep in the beach house, so it was just Max and me. The roads were quite dark and to my surprise, deserted. I was very uncomfortable. I again felt that someone was watching me, but I looked everywhere and there was no one. Halfway through the walk, I decided to turn around. I didn't want to be in that place for one more second. Suddenly, Max stopped dead in his tracks. His ears perked up and he began to growl in a way I had never heard him growl before. His body tensed and he stared into the darkness. My heart began to pound uncontrollably. If I was already paranoid before, this just made things worse. Max? What is it, boy? Did you see something? I tried to calm him down by petting him, but it didn't work. Max became frantic, barking madly and trying to escape from his leash. Finally, he broke free and ran off into the darkness. I had no choice but to follow him, at which point I didn't care about being watched or the idea of someone being near us. If you had a dog, you know when it's endangered, nothing else matters. I ran after Max at high speed, his bark echoing in the night. I didn't know where we were going, and I was afraid I would get tired and he would run away. Luckily, I caught up with him. The dog had only run for 1.5 blocks backward. As I grabbed his leash, I thought Max got so nervous about another dog nearby. But no. They were both barking, but they weren't looking at each other. They were looking down a dark alley. When I looked down that alley, I saw it. It was a dark silhouette staring at me. My body froze in fear as I watched that figure. The darkness hid his features, but it was clear that he was stalking us. I wanted to believe that it was a person living on the street or some teenagers, but it wasn't. His gaze was fixed on mine and he didn't seem to be scared. Maybe it was the paranoia of the moment, but standing there, I felt a horrible aura of oppression. I felt like a helpless animal in front of a hunter. In an instant, the figure moved rapidly in our direction, and my heart skipped a beat. I grabbed Max by the collar and ran back toward the beach house, with the dark figure following close behind. Adrenaline coursed through my veins as I ran desperately, struggling to maintain the slim lead we had. I realized I would never make it home in time, so as the shadow was about to catch up, I ducked into a public restroom near the beach. My hands were shaking as I reached for my phone to call the police. But at that moment, my blood ran cold. No, my phone, where is it? After a few seconds of desperate searching, I realized that my phone had probably fallen to the ground while I was being chased. Before I left the house, I knew I had shorts with large pockets and no zipper. I thought my phone might fall out, but I didn't care. I preferred to be comfortable, and now I was paying the price. On the other side of the bathroom, the stalker was banging on the door desperately, trying to get in. Max was also very frightened. At first, he barked a lot from nervousness, but after a while, he ducked his head and hid next to a toilet. The night wore on and the fear only increased. After several minutes, the knocking on the door stopped. But every now and then, we saw a shadow behind the door. Maybe it was other people passing by, or maybe it was the stalker, but I didn't want to take the risk of checking. Eventually, exhaustion and stress got the better of me and I fell asleep. When I woke up, the light in the bathroom where we had taken refuge was off, and the door was wide open. My heart was pounding harder than ever, and to my terror, I realized Max was no longer with me.
Max, where are you?
At that moment, I realized what was happening. That laugh wasn't coming from outside the bathroom. The laugh was right next to me. The light coming in from the outside illuminated the bathroom a little bit, just enough to reveal a figure hiding in a corner next to the door. His face was black, his smile was macabre, and his hideous yellow eyes were staring at me. The man, or whatever it was that was stalking me, was beside me. Desperate, I ran for the bathroom door. But before I could get out, a cold, firm hand grabbed my shoulder. I turned to face the person, but at that moment, I was pushed back hard and fell to the floor. Laughter filled the room. I quickly stood up again and escaped the bathroom. The stalker didn't try to stop me again. He just kept laughing. I ran in the direction of my house. I didn't feel watched anymore. I didn't see anyone behind me, but I kept running away, crying. Finally, I arrived at the beach house where my family was sleeping. I entered agitated with my heart still beating uncontrollably. Max was there, safe and sound. He had returned on his own as if he knew he was supposed to wait for me there. I called the police and explained what had happened, but when they arrived, they found no trace of the person who had chased us. On the other hand, they told me that they found my phone on the ground, with a cracked screen, but it still worked. I had recorded a video of Max barking at the stalker. I'm still watching the video, trying to wonder what it was that we came across that night. I tried not to let this get to me, but I keep finding more and more excuses to go on vacation somewhere else. Every night I go to bed with my wife. I can't help but think of one thing. If he wanted to, the stalker could have made me never leave that bathroom. The only reason I'm alive is because he wanted me to be. And tomorrow, if something like that happens to me again, I don't know if I'll be that lucky again.
This all happened on New Year's Eve a few years ago. I was working as a cocktail waitress in one of the big casinos on the Las Vegas Strip at the time. That evening, I had 2 trays of drinks spilled on me. A woman accused me of taking her token voucher, 6 indecent proposals, and one very handsy drunk that after playing bongos on my butt, had to be escorted off the property. By the end of my shift, I was beat. I crawled into the locker room, convinced that I was going to spend a quiet evening at home. Then I saw my friend Abby text about going to a party. I was adamantly against it. I leaned against my locker and texted her, "Not tonight, I'm wiped out." She immediately called me on my cell phone. "Oh, come on, you have to come. Josh is gonna be there. The party's in one of those fancy 10 grand a night suites at the Belladonna. How often do you have a chance to? More often than you think. Chloe, please, for me?" "Fine, let me clean up. I'm just finishing my shift." I hung up, then I noticed a black rose sitting on the bench in front of my locker. At first, I thought it was for one of the other girls. Then I saw a note attached to the stem with my name on it. I opened the note, reading, "See you tonight, love, X." Huh, okay. I quickly dressed, deciding at the last second to take the rose with me. On any given night, I was asked out like a dozen times. I'm sure it had something to do with the skimpy uniforms management made us dress in, but it was the first time someone left me a rose, regardless of if it was black, and that felt special to me. The clock on my cell phone read 10:30 by the time I made it to the Belladonna's lobby. People were already beginning to gather on the casino floor to celebrate New Year's Eve. In the middle of the crowd, I noticed a man wearing a long black coat with a weird-shaped hood, like a character in a video game. Suddenly, he paused and turned, looking directly at me. I couldn't see his face, only 2 unnaturally bright blue eyes, which creeped me out a little. A crowd of people walked by, and as they left, he had vanished. Weird. "There you are!" Abby grabbed me from behind, startling me. "Come on, we're missing all the fun!" She dragged me over to the elevator bank, and we hopped onto one of the elevators. I hear they have a live band. Inside the elevator, there was a full-wall digital display advertising images of the different restaurants in the hotel. The images of the food all reminded me that I hadn't eaten since noon. The image blinked for a second, and there he was, the man in the hood, staring at me. Abby, check this out," I stammered. "What?" Abby's back was turned from the display. By the time she turned, the man's image had flipped to a steak ad. "Ew, you know I'm vegetarian." But the elevator doors opened onto a hallway filled with partygoers. There were so many people that we had to squeeze through to reach the doors of our party. "Help me look for Josh." Tell you what, you go look for Josh and text me when you find him. I need to find a restroom. Abby and I split ways, her to look for Josh and me to look for an unoccupied restroom. I searched the suite, finding a quiet bedroom where, shockingly, no one was. Off the bedroom, to much of my relief, there was a bathroom. I rushed inside and locked the door. Seconds into doing my business, I heard a noise come from the television mounted on the wall in front of the bathtub. I turned to see the man in the hood on the television, watching me. What the?
Hello, Chloe. Did you like the rose I left you?
I quickly flushed and walked over to the television. Ah, so you're Mr. X. What kind of sick joke are you pulling? Josh, is that you?
You mean him?
The image flipped to show a cell phone camera image of Josh talking to Abby at the party.
I heard you have a crush on him. Tell me, Chloe, what does he have that I don't?
A face, for one. Now stop doing this. You're really creeping me out. Back in the bedroom, I took a seat on the bed. My feet were killing me, and I needed to rest them before dancing the night away. I must have nodded off for a few minutes. Sometime later, I woke to the sound of the television across from the bed turning on. The image of Mr. X appeared again. Come on, enough of the creep show. He held up something to the screen. At first, I couldn't tell what it was. Then I saw he was holding Josh's skinned face by his blonde hair.
How do you like me now that I have a face?
My lungs filled with air, forcing out a shrilling scream. I ran out of the room into the crowded party. Deep down, I knew it was all a joke. It had to be. I ran outside onto the balcony to get some fresh air. Outside, I saw Mr. X's image on one of the large digital billboards in front of the hotel. That's it. I'm out of here. I ran back inside, searching for Abby. While doing so, I paused at a digital frame with Mr. X's image. Who are you? What do you want with me?
You, Chloe. I've wanted you ever since I first saw you. You brought me a whiskey a few weeks ago. Ever since, I knew we were meant to be together.
I ignored Mr. X and continued searching for Abby. I asked several people at the party if they'd seen Josh or Abby, but no one knew who they were. Near the kitchenette, I paused to look into a fancy exercise mirror hanging on the wall. That's where I saw Abby in the hallway with Mr. X standing behind her. In a panic, I slammed my hands against the mirror, trying to gain her attention. Then I saw something shiny inch close to her throat. A knife. Mr. X leaned against Abby, slicing her throat. I must have passed out after that. I woke the next morning in my bedroom to the sound of my mother urgently knocking on my door. I haven't a clue how I got there or what happened after I passed out. For a moment, I thought I dreamed everything. My mother told me that the police were at the door, urgently needing to speak to me. The police informed me that Josh's body was found in a linen closet 6 floors below the party, his face carved from his skull. Abby was also missing, but they had no clue what happened to her, only that her blood was found on the hallway carpet. I packed my belongings and left town, and I haven't been back since. Lily was sick, and I knew every Christmas with her was a present in itself. But with every year, it got harder. I wanted to give her all I had, even when I possessed little more than the clothes on my back due to our situation. I was the full-time caretaker of my terminal twin sister, and while she could barely leave the bed some days, it was sad, especially because I felt like there just wasn't enough I could give my sister to make up for all the bad that was happening to us. One night, I flipped through her diary. It was a habit to make sure she'd taken all her pills, when I found something odd. A letter to Santa. Does she still write them? Poor thing, I'll make sure that she gets to see Santa, and I will do everything I can to help her survive. But I was broke. I was so broke that I could barely afford to call 3 numbers I found online. 2 turned me down. 1 was too expensive, the other too busy. The last one was Jeff. His ad was a bit different from the others. It popped up as I was about to give up on my search, to be honest. Jeff sounded a bit too young to play Santa, close in age to me and my sister, but he was confident he would be able to fool her.
You know, it's not hard to sound a bit older. You just have to drop your voice a bit, make it raspier.
For a second, a shiver went down my spine. There was something dangerous to the way he spoke. He was confident, perhaps, a lot more than I have ever been. Maybe that should have been the first warning sign. He was perfect. He was a good actor, just charismatic enough to pass as the real thing, but he was cheap, like way too cheap, and he was even willing to help us for free after I explained everything to him.
I couldn't ask for money. All I want is for you and your sister to have the brightest of days.
That should have been the second red flag. Many organizations have rejected Lily's wishes because she was far too old. There wasn't much to do for her, and while kids who still had hope needed them more, I guess. An adult woman who's had a rough life deserved only pity from most people. Christmas Eve came. Jeff asked if he could drop by then so that he could spend Christmas Day with his family. I whispered, of course, into the phone, grinning from ear to ear as I eyed Lily's sleeping form. She was going to be so happy. I could barely wait. I'd always shared my secrets with her, but this one needed to be a surprise. Maybe if she knew, she'd have seen the signs. The knock on the door came at 8, an hour earlier than I'd expected. Still, I shot off the couch I'd slept on like a rocket, my features pulled into the happiest smile I could muster. Joy for Lily was gathering in my chest, but there was this inexplicable worry, too. After all, this was the smallest thing on her bucket list. What if she hated it? What if she... Lay? Who's that? My twin's voice broke me out of my thoughts as I stood in front of the door about to let her present in. No one, I sang as I opened the door. Something was off. The man in front of me was wearing a Santa costume, right? But he didn't really look like the person in his ad. He looked older, with dark eyes that had me faltering for a second. Are you sure? Is this one of your crazy surprises? You know that I don't want you to spend money on... The voice was the same, at least. Jeff stood in front of me, but being under the messy white beard he'd plastered across his face, he smelled of beer and cigarettes, but at least he turned up. Come on in. She doesn't know you're here yet, I winked at him, mustering up all my festive joy to cut through the surprise his appearance had caused me. Judging a book by its cover was never fair, anyway.
I had a hunch it was a surprise.
The way he talked was odd. There was a slow drawl to his voice, each word being dragged out just a bit too long until it sounded almost awkward. Again, I shook it off. Sis, I'm coming, Lily. I motioned for Jeff to follow me as quietly as he could. He nodded, though, for a second. His eyes didn't meet mine. Never turn your back to a stranger. My mother's words popped into my head. I rarely thought of her, but something about the situation caused me to remember the little nuggets of wisdom she liked to tell me and Lily when we were younger. Perhaps part of me enjoyed breaking the promises I'd made her all those years ago. Still, it didn't take long for me to regret my actions. Something cold pressed against my neck, and the second I took a step forward, what the?
Listen to me. I'll play nice with your little sister. Give her some presents, whatever. When we're done, you'll follow me to my car without a word.
It was a threat. I wanted to ask, and what if I don't do it? But I somehow felt that was even more dangerous, and so I nodded.
Good girl. You know, You should feel thankful that I accept such a scrawny thing as payment for being a good Samaritan. Are you sure it's your sister who's sick and not you?
Tears quickly flooded my eyes, but I shook my head a few times to get rid of them. I looked around, desperate for a way out, but I found nothing. Our place was humble at best, and Lily was very sick. The only way I could keep her comfortable was by spending all of what we had on her. Sometimes I felt selfish, even for just eating. Lay? Follow me. I cleared my throat and led the man into Lily's room. I expected her to smile, but she didn't. What the heck? Surprise! I wanted you to finally meet Santa like you always wanted. Oh, thank you. Lily sounded unsure. Even when she finally smiled as Jeff stepped close to her, it never quite reached her eyes. I never got to ask why. Half an hour later, I was in Jeff's car, hands and feet bound.
Just so you know, if you scream for help, my buddies will get your sister. There's no way you can escape from me.
I wanted him to disappear, but I knew it was helpless, and it was all my fault.
After Delilah's death, I didn't need the big house we once wanted to fill with kids and pets. Even if I wanted to keep it, I didn't have the money to maintain it, not on my own. And so, I did what I thought was best, sold it to the highest bidder. That's what she would want me to do too. That's what I told myself as I signed the papers, a smile curling on my lips. I was so sure that my wife was proud of me for moving on. So much, perhaps, that I didn't notice the signs that something was wrong first. It all started a week after I moved to my new house. One moment, I was sleeping soundly. The next, I bolted out of bed, wide awake despite having been sleeping only seconds ago. At first glance, everything was fine. But one of Delilah's beloved vases was lying on the floor, shattered. What happened to you? Did I maybe leave the window open or something? Maybe a stray cat came into play, or I don't know. Talking to myself was a nervous habit I'd developed mostly after my wife's passing. I felt a lot less lonely when I was talking to myself. After all, before her accident, both Delilah and I had worked from home, so we mostly hung out with each other. To be honest, I didn't have a lot of friends. She had some, but most of them lived quite far away. Basically, we saw each other 24/7, and we were content with that. But once I was on my own, things changed. I often had to shake my head a bit to snap out of my spiraling thoughts. I needed to focus on living and making my late wife happy. But, well, after that first incident with the vase, things seemed to get even stranger. Things disappeared. My wedding ring, to start with. One second I was wearing it, the next I wasn't. I really thought I was going senile or perhaps not sleeping enough, but that wasn't the only thing to go missing. Pots, pans, even books seemed to just stop existing. I was starting to feel somewhat nervous, to be honest. Was my new cozy home haunted? That was the only logical solution. After all, I wasn't going mad myself. Well, my therapist did say last time that I needed to take some vitamins to help with this awful brain fog I have. Maybe I am the ghost myself. But then, it happened. I had some co-workers over for once, though we were all working from my living room. Their office had no power, and we had some important projects to hand in. I was sitting on the couch with my laptop on my lap when it just started floating away from me. I had no idea what to say or do, though. I tried to reach for it. Slowly, the device inched away from me. Everyone was watching. Pat's jaw hung open. What the? And then, the laptop fell on the floor. It didn't shatter, which made me exclaim in joy. Thank goodness. And then, it lifted into the air again, only to be dropped back onto the ground. The process repeated itself until the screen was shattered into tiny pieces. "Dude, I think your place is haunted," Pat muttered after a moment. I swallowed hard. So, I wasn't the only one who felt that way.
Go back home.
That was when I heard her for the first time. The short hairs bristled on the back of my neck. The voice was so familiar, but strange too. Distorted to the point where I could barely recognize it. And yet... "Delilah?"
Go back home, you fool!
She hissed. She's always been a calm, patient soul, but suddenly she sounded so angry. "I think I'm going mad," I muttered to my coworkers, who were standing around, clearly too nervous to sit down after witnessing, well, whatever that was going on. Before, I really thought that moving was the right choice. I wanted a smaller place without many reminders of my wife, but, well, clearly she wanted none of that. The living room was a mess. The more I shook my head deciding not to obey her, the more the walls shook. "Something really isn't right here," Eric muttered. He looked like he was about to beeline for the door. And, well, that's what he did only seconds later. I was alone within 5 minutes. Alone with Delilah once more. I needed to move. I couldn't afford our own place. I was rambling to myself by then, my hands ripping at my hair. I felt as if I was being dragged around by Delilah, or what was left of her. "Let me just do my thing! Please! Let me live a happy life!"
You don't deserve one. Not after what you've done to me.
I could feel her whisper into my ear. I swallowed hard as I tried to make a break for the door, but she wasn't letting me. The walls were trembling, the floor breaking apart at the seams. She wanted to trap me like I had trapped her. "No! It wasn't my fault, and you know that!" I yelled, though no answer came. I tried to head for the door like the others, but it was locked shut. No matter how hard I pulled on it, nothing happened. And then, everything went black for a second. When I came to, something was off. Sure, there were some things on the floor and my laptop was shattered, but there was no other sign of Delilah or even my coworkers ever being there. I was sitting on the couch, perfectly fine, even though I should have been in pain. Maybe she was right. Perhaps it was time for me to move back home and face the truth of what I'd done. People think the strangest things happen in haunted mansions or dark places. I was one of those people, until something happened to me that changed my mind. My name is Nick, and this is the story of my first month working at Burger King. At that time of the year, Burger King was looking for new employees to cover vacation shifts, so they were only looking for people to work for 3 months. Since I was one of those casual employees, I naturally got the off shifts, so I was one of the people in charge of working the night shift, where we were managed by a more senior employee, and most of the new people were in charge of cleaning or cooking. The first few weeks went by really fast. This was my first job, so I was happy to just clean while learning from other employees by taking care of people. I used to get home very late, but I didn't mind, since I lived a few blocks away. Everything was going well at work, until one night something unthinkable happened. We had already closed the doors to the public and were about to leave. We were just a few employees, and I was the only one mopping the floors. I was about to finish, only the game section was left. I was just about to finish when suddenly I heard some noises in the ball pit. The ball pit was neither very big nor very flashy. It was somewhat translucent so that the parents could control their children, and it was that very thing that made me make the discovery that I did. The transparency of the ball pit revealed the silhouette of a child inside. How was that even possible? Perhaps one of the parents had forgotten a child, Surely they were looking for him like crazy. I ran towards the ball pit, and when I looked through one of its pipes, I didn't see anything. Hey, guys! Come here, quick! I called the rest of the employees without taking my eyes off the ball pit, in case the boy escaped. I didn't see him anymore, but I was sure he was still there. There was no way he was going anywhere. I told my coworkers everything, and we all inspected the place. There was nothing. Are you sure you saw him there? Yeah, not only did I see the shadow across the ball pit, but I heard it too.
Maybe he ran away while you were looking for him.
Where would he run off to? All the doors are locked and I never let him out of my sight.
Andrew, you've been here longer. Have you ever seen anything like this?
No, never. I'm sure it was your imagination. There's nothing here. It's too late, guys. Let's get this over with and go home. And with that said, we all left. Everyone was laughing and making jokes about me seeing ghosts, but no one really believed me. I needed to prove to them what I saw was real, and I was going to do it. Over the next few days, I always encouraged them to come at night to see if anything happened, but to my disappointment, it never did. Some time passed and no one believed me anymore. Even I doubted that I had really seen something. But again, when I was alone, it happened again. I was again cleaning the playground area and putting up the chairs when I saw a shadow crawling in the playground. I thought about calling my coworkers, but it could disappear again. So this time, I did the most logical thing I could think of. I took out my cell phone and recorded it. I thought that by recording, the silhouette would surely disappear, but it didn't, and I captured everything on camera. Once I finished recording, I tried to quietly call my colleagues, but no one came. The shadow began to move to the top, where there was a small hole with a plastic grill to keep the children from falling in. I approached the tall tube and looked inside for the child who seemed to be crying, but when I looked again, I saw nothing. Suddenly, the sobbing stopped. The room filled with a long and tedious silence, and I just stared at the tube waiting for the child to appear. I guess it was obvious. Well, at least I have you on camera. Something had pulled me by my feet. At that moment, it was all very confusing. I just remember hitting my back on the ground and feeling that something was pulling me towards the tube below. As I resisted, I saw the inside of the tube for the first time. I saw the boy. He didn't look like an innocent crying child, but like a horrible monster disguised as a child, trying to hunt its prey. His skin was dead white, and his eyes had a huge black shadow under them. The shadow grew larger and larger with each passing second, while large red veins were growing out of his eyes and spreading all over his face. I did everything I could to escape. I kicked and screamed as much as I could. Help! Someone help me! This boy's strength was not normal at all. No matter how hard I tried, he kept dragging me slowly with frightening ease. Once I got half of my body into the tube, I tried to hold on to him with my arms. I was able to stop him for a few seconds, but I couldn't hold on any longer. My arms let go of the tube and let the being drag me into it. I felt a hand on my face that pulled me to the center of the ball pit, but suddenly, a hand from outside grabbed my hand and dragged me out of the ball pit tube. It was one of my coworkers. Once I was out, all my coworkers started to join him and pulled me out. Guys, you heard me. You saved me. How could I have not heard you, Nick? I think the whole block heard you screaming. You saw it, didn't you? The ghost boy? No, I didn't see anything. You were alone. But you grabbed my hand. He was pulling me too. I'm sorry to tell you, but no one was forcing on the other side. I just grabbed your hand and pulled you. After that, everyone looked at me with concern. The playground was empty. I was alone again. Anyway, this time they would believe me. I took out my cell phone and looked for the recording. They all looked at it in shock and quickly moved away from the tubes. At the same time, I felt something burning in my ankles. When I pulled up my pants, we all saw the same thing. My ankles were red, with the fingerprints of a little boy. The next day, I told my manager everything. I told him that there were witnesses and everything, and without worrying, he said he would take care of it. A week and a half later, I received a dismissal telegram. No matter how much I made a fuss, no one ever did anything about it. Something tells me that the manager knew about this, but decided not to do anything about it for fear that they would close the place or remove the games area, which used to attract many families. Today, the ball pit is still there, in the same place. It attacked me at night, but who knows if tomorrow it'll be able to grab a child who's alone, and maybe there will be no one to rescue him.
December had only just arrived when it happened. I was a mere 10 years of age, still naive as to what awaited me in the outside world. Every year, at the start of December, when the snow began to fall and the air froze, my family and I would dash out into the fresh morning snow, spending the entire weekend building snowmen, snow forts, and having snowball fights. But one year, we were met with a ghastly occurrence that forever changed how we saw Christmas. The Friday that came before the first weekend of December, my family and I were all raving about our excitement towards the snow that was to come the next day, and our plans for what we were going to do in it. I went to bed soon after, brimming with anticipation, so much so that I could hardly sleep. I spent that night staring out of my window as a blanket of white covered it, drooling down the glass pane. Throughout the silence, I could make out the extremely faint noise of shuffling coming from outside, even the mild crunching of snow below boots. I wouldn't be surprised if people were already out as the snow fell, lavishing in it before the morning came out. What I found slightly unnerving was that the sound seemed to be coming from my garden. I remember it was at this point that my eyes began to close, and I was quick to fall into a great deep slumber soon after. The next morning I leapt out of bed, throwing open the wardrobe and piling on all the clothes I could find, preparing myself for the adventure outside. I could hear my sister and father doing the same, and I was sure my mother would join us later, after her lion, of course. Once ready, we all hurried down the stairs, bursting into the kitchen, grabbing the set of keys that opened the back door. As the keys twisted, I could already feel the cold gripping onto me, but the adrenaline kept it at bay. The door swung open. There was no snow, only weak little clumps dotted around the drenched grass. I could feel my heart sink, as well as that of my father and sister.
No snow, eh? It's alright. Let's go put on a film instead. I'm sure there'll be more to come later.
My father was extremely optimistic for the circumstances, but as they walked off with weighted steps, it looked like lines, like the snow had been removed systematically. But by who? I didn't think it was worth the trouble to think about, so I closed the door and joined my family for a movie. That night, the same routine played out. I laid in bed, watching as faint drops of snow drizzled from above, severing my vision from the outside world. That night, the same routine played out. Simultaneously, I was able to hear the sound of crunching grow louder and louder from outside. I crept out of my bed to look out the window, but the snow was too thick to see further than a couple of meters. I went back to bed, crossing my fingers, begging for the snow to remain. I slumped on my winter wear and joined my family as we walked down the stairs, making our way over to the back door, with a general air of fatigue hanging over us all. Once again, the door creaked open, only to reveal yet again, no snow, only subtle lines in the soaking wet grass. My father said the same thing as before, but I couldn't hear him. I was far too concerned with the lined grass. Dad, why are there lines in the grass?
Probably just from how the snow melted. But cheer up. Another movie day never hurt anyone.
Once again with the optimism. I wasn't entirely convinced, but what else was there to do? And with that, we all wandered drearily over to the sofa and spent the rest of the day watching movies. Then came the evening. It was pitch black outside when I heard a noise rustling about in the garden. I looked at my family, seeing if any of them heard it. Until all of a sudden, a loud bang hit the window. Alarmed, we all leapt up out of our skins. My sister began to cry, and my mother and father looked frantically at one another, then towards the circle of snow dripping from the window. My father motioned for my mother to grab my sister and move to the back end of the living room. He then made his way over towards the window, searching for the source of the noise. He came closer and closer until his nose was practically up against the window. trying to peer out into the thick darkness. His expression dropped. Following me, I peered out the window next to him, and my eyes met with the dark figure outside. I stopped, feeling my blood freezing out of fear. My father beckoned for me to step back, to which I obliged as he opened the window.
Hey, what the hell do you think you're doing? We got kids in here! Leave now or I'll call the police!
My dad shouted, waving his phone around. The man just stood there, holding a snowball in his right hand, grinning wildly. My father closed the window, shutting it tightly, dialing the police as he did so whilst I stared at the man, feeling my eyes welling up with fear. He slowly raised his left hand and pointed a finger. First towards me, then towards him. As we waited for the police, the man refused to leave. Instead, he remained standing there, grinning. Eventually, the police entered the house, but by the time they went out, he was gone. My father and I went out there with them, and after an extremely short search, the true horror became clear. Behind the shed, the only thing in the garden was a man-made igloo. This was where the snow had gone. This man had been just meters away from us for the last 2 nights. He may have left for now, but there was no telling what he was waiting here for. What if we had gone out there? Every year since, we checked the entire garden in case he returns. We weren't safe. Christmas is now rotten with fear.
I smiled as I walked around the new house. We had just moved in, but it felt familiar because the house had been in my family for hundreds of years. Moving boxes were stacked everywhere, overflowing with packing paper. We had arrived, but we still had a lot of work to do to get everything unpacked. I looked over to my husband, who was in the kitchen crumpling packing paper. I heard my son laughing underneath a pile of boxes that my husband had just finished emptying. I walked out the wooden front door, standing on a concrete stoop, admiring the acres of empty land this old house sat on. All of this is ours, I thought. The sun was sinking past the horizon, and I could see storm clouds rolling in. I'm glad we got everything into the house before the storm hits. Taking a deep inhale, I could smell the rain getting closer. I shut the door and went back inside, finding my son and husband laughing on the floor in the middle of empty boxes. A burst of thunder shook the house. My husband smirked.
These country storms don't mess around. Daddy, are we gonna be okay? We'll be just fine. We're all gonna camp out here in the living room for tonight, okay?
My husband reached over and pulled my son closer, putting his hand on top of mine. The lights flickered. My husband started blowing up the air mattress we had packed, knowing we wouldn't get enough unpacked to sleep in a bed tonight. I got up and walked to the top of the stairs. Each step squeaked underneath my feet. I saw a large cobweb in the window that was at the top of the stairs. Glancing out the window, it was pouring outside. I could see the grassy plains for miles and miles, the wind from the storm tossing the trees on our lot. Before I looked away from the window, I saw a man climbing over the fence that bordered our driveway. That's weird. My mom mentioned that the town is super welcoming, no matter how small it is. Maybe someone heard that we had moved in already. I skipped down the stairs, joining my husband and son in the furnitureless living room. The lights flickered again. The doorbell rang, echoing throughout the ancient wooden structure, like an organ playing at a funeral. When the sound finished, 2 abrupt knocks rattled the old wooden door. I answered it. A man, 4 inches shorter than myself, stood in front of me, soaked from head to toe. Joe, is that you?
Hey, Marie, it's been, 20 years? I'm so sorry to bother you like this on your first night back in town, but my car broke down and I can't really make it anywhere by foot in this rain.
That's awful. We don't have much to offer right now, but you're welcome to come inside until the rain stops.
That's so kind. Thank you so much. I'll be out of your hair as soon as the storm breaks.
Don't worry about it. It's nice to have an old friend around. I smiled as he walked into the house. I closed the door and saw him sit on the floor next to my husband and son. I grabbed a blanket out of a box and threw it to him. The lights flickered again.
I have some spare clothes in the box upstairs if you want to grab some. It might be a little bit more comfy. Who knows how long this storm is going to last? It looks nasty. That would be amazing. It reminds me of the times when Marie and I would play in the rain after school.
My husband guided him up the stairs, letting him into the upstairs room, then left him alone to change. I was at the bottom of the stairs when a loud bang of thunder rattled the house and the lights went out. I yelled through the darkness. I think there's a flashlight on the kitchen counter. I unpacked that box earlier.
Don't worry, I'll go find it. I think there's a candle somewhere there too.
Tripping over a box, he found the flashlight and flicked it on. The lights shone on a newspaper, highlighting the headline article. The headline read, "Killer escapes from local prison." He grabbed the paper and walked back to the living room where my son and I sat.
Check this out.
His voice wasn't as confident as it was when he said he knew where the flashlight was. It shook at the end of his sentence. I grabbed the newspaper, reading the front page. My eyes met his. My hands trembled. The picture for the article looked like a headshot of my childhood friend. We stared at each other without a word.
Dad? Mom? What's wrong? Nothing, Sweet Pea. You stay here with the blanket. I'm gonna go take a candle to our visitor so we can see.
No, I'll go. You stay here. I got up, candle in one hand, flashlight in the other. I approached the stairs. The flashlight illuminated only a small part of the ground in front of me. I felt a cold chill move down my back. I yelled up the stairs. Hey, are you still up there? I have a candle for you if you need it. There was no answer. I put my foot onto the first step, moving slowly. I flinched at the loud squeak of the third step. I slowly walked up the rest of the stairs. At the top, I saw something move and quickly turned around. The flashlight reflected in the window. My heart was pounding and my hand trembled. Hey, are you up here? It was silent. I felt a hand on my shoulder and I turned around. Hey, I brought this for you.
Thanks.
He pulled out a knife and held it at my neck.
So, you know about me, huh?
I swallowed. I looked out the window at the top of the stairs and saw a line of police officers racing toward our house. What? I don't know what you're talking about. I tried to act confused. Just what we shared with each other back in elementary school. I stuck out the candle, trying to keep him away from me. I backed up toward the stairs, distancing myself from him. Then he turned and ran down the dark hall, disappearing into another room. I sprinted back to the living room, setting the candle by my husband. The doorbell rang, and I opened the door. 2 police officers stood at the door, water dripping from their uniforms. I felt relief surge through my body.
You're under arrest!
What? Why?
There's been a warrant out for your arrest for a month now. Skipping towns doesn't change that.
My husband rushed to the door, tripping over the candle on his way. The flames caught the blanket on fire.
Dad, help!
My husband went back and grabbed my son. The officers cuffed my wrists, walking me away from the house as flames started to eat the old wooden structure. Water dripped down our faces in the rain. The officers shoved me into the back seat of the car. I don't understand. The officers slammed the door of the car and started the engine. I looked out the back window of the car. My husband and son are standing in front of the burning house. We pulled away in the car, the rain blurring their figures as I looked behind. The house in flames. The police officer keeps driving. I scream, coughing tears. I don't understand. We rounded the turn of the driveway, and they were gone. Sitting in my prison cell, I hear an officer.
Copy that. Going to check out the fire over on Long Road. We have what we believe to be the remains of a nationally wanted serial killer from that fire.
I couldn't believe my eyes as I stepped into the bungalow that would be our home for the next few weeks. It was small, but cozy, decorated everywhere with bright colored flowers. A bottle of champagne sat in a bucket right in the middle of the main bed, which was 3 times the size of the one we had at home. "This is gonna be fantastic," I said as I hopped on the bed, grinning from ear to ear. Toby followed suit, though he looked a bit concerned. "You okay, husband?" I could still barely believe I could call him that after dating for 3 whole years. He nodded, though the crease between his brows told me he was thinking about something hard.
This place is just amazing. I'm just not sure why it was so cheap.
"You don't think there'll be hidden fees, do you?" I joked with him, though he was right. We did get an amazing place for practically free. The reason behind it, according to the website, was simple. It belonged to a new hotel that needed more reviews. They were willing to sacrifice some money to get them, which, well, made a lot of sense at the time. There was also a story I had heard long ago about the island and its protector. I couldn't recall much of it, just the fact that it was heavily tied into the life of natives. Anyway, let's not think about that. Let's go explore the resort. I grabbed Toby by the hand and started dragging him out into the tropical heat. We were both exhausted from flying a red-eye to the island, but I needed to see what we were in for. It took us only a few minutes to find the main reception room of the complex. We were led to our room straight from the car, so that was our first time looking at it. It looked very empty. We said that word together, looking at each other with a small smirk as we did. "I thought there'd be more people," I added quietly, but then quickly shook my head. "Well, at least we have a whole lot more space for ourselves. I bet we won't have to queue up for food or drinks either." Toby mustered up a grin, though he looked a touch uneasy as well. This was our first fancy vacation together, so I think we both wanted it to be perfect. Being lonely wasn't an issue when we were with each other, but it was still a bit odd that... "Oh, sorry, I didn't see you there." A member of staff, Brenda, a receptionist, all but appeared in front of us. I couldn't help but take a step back. Just how long had we been standing there like fools?
Whoa! I didn't see you there.
Toby's back touched the ornate walls. He looked nervous for a second. I quickly grabbed his hand, giving it a gentle squeeze. I knew that he could be a bit anxious around new people. I couldn't really fault him, to be fair. "No worries. I apologize for how quiet everything is right now. We are expecting a large group soon, so most of our rooms will be filled then. But for now, the 2 of you can explore the resort at your leisure, of course. Whether we have 2 guests or 200, our facilities are always open." Brenda rattled that off as if it was a script she'd learned somewhere. I couldn't fault her much. It was clear that English was her second, or maybe even third language. If anything, I couldn't help but admire her for the smile she could put on even after scaring the living daylights out of us. "Do you have any suggestions on where we should go?" I asked after a quick pause, shifting my gaze from her to eye the lavish gold decorations. Some parts of the hotel resembled a church or temple with strange paintings that I could have sworn depicted saints and not just random people. That being said, who was I to judge their taste? As long as it looked nice, I didn't care. "Since you are all alone for now, why not explore the waters a bit? You can rent some equipment here, anything you need. Oh, and of course, do explore the restaurants too. I was up in the Japanese one just now, and everything I had was delectable." We nodded at her enthusiasm. It was nice to be treated so kindly. However, there was something I noticed in Brenda's behavior that felt a little strange. She was shifting from side to side as if it was uncomfortable. Perhaps it was the heat? "We'll go explore the beach after grabbing a quick snack then," I decided. Toby let me, though he squeezed my hand tightly straight after. Brenda nodded and, with the biggest smile on her face and some quick words about how she wanted us to have the best time here, walked off.
Something's not right here.
Toby murmured into my ear as we made our way to one of the bars that was supposed to sell snacks. We had a handy map that we found in our room, so despite the lack of people around, navigating the place wasn't that hard. "You're just being dramatic. It's a brand new hotel, and Brenda even said that they're getting..." I was cut off by a strange sound. It was a low, raspy growl that I couldn't place. What the? I turned around, trying to find the source of the sound, but I couldn't.
I have no idea what that was.
Toby seemed even more nervous, biting down on his lower lip as he pulled me a bit closer to him. His grip was warm but shaky. Must have been the radio or something, I concluded after a second, though even I doubted my own words. It was uncanny, after all.
Want to just go and take a look at the beach first? I'm sure we can stop by the beach bar for some chips or something.
Toby started pulling me outside before I could even say anything. I felt bad for how spooked he was, but there wasn't much I could do about it when I felt similar to him. However, hiding it was the only way I could make sure he'd remain somewhat calm. It's funny how we could both be so nervous in such situations, but one of us always had to be the strong one to push on. The beach was as silent as the rest of the place. Even the waves crashing against the shore sounded muted, as if there were cotton buds in my ears. My husband looked around with an odd expression on his face. The beach was supposed to be the picture of serenity and beauty, but it wasn't. It felt alive almost, the wind ripping into my hair with each step I took. The sand was too hot, burning my feet.
It's saying get away.
Toby murmured finally, taking a few steps back. I rolled my eyes at him, thinking that he was playing. Come on, we both know that's not true, I said. Or, well, wanted to say. Before I could have muttered anything else, my vision went black. The pain only registered in my head when I came to. I was kneeling in the shallow water, hands and feet bound. Toby was nowhere to be seen. There is a saying here, in our corner of the woods, you gotta work for what you want. But first, you have to make sure you have permission from nature to do so. Oh, that was similar to the story I'd heard. But why couldn't I remember any more of it? Brenda, her accent had changed. She sounded as if she'd spoken English her whole life. Was it all an act? The first few fish a fisherman get need to be thrown back into the ocean. They become an offering, a gift. Or perhaps you could even call them part of a sacrifice. Wait, what did she mean by that? 2 lost souls will give us the much-needed attention from the press. It will be negative first, of course, but then curiosity will win. People will flood our resorts wanting to see where our very first guest stepped into the ocean, only to never return. You're crazy! I shouted, trying to move away, to do anything. My heart was pounding rapidly in my chest, tunnel vision setting in as I could see nothing but the rough, hungry waves. Legend says that a beast is lurking in these waters. He's rarely seen, but he brings well-deserved good luck to those who pamper him the right way. Toby was sitting next to me in the sand. His eyes were wide, but unseeing, an expression of fear frozen into his features. I tried to get his attention by shifting towards him, but I couldn't. Instead, I tried to look where his eyes were pointing. The monster Brenda talked about was real, and it was very, very hungry. The night was still young, the moon barely visible in the sky. Dancers with torches ran past me, screaming and singing as they beckoned people to join in. The procession was already several miles long. I'd never seen it get this big. Let's go! Em, my sister, grabbed me by the hand, pulling me towards the dancers. I shook my head first. It was way too busy. I felt weird about dancing with people I didn't know like this, too. And there was something else going on, something I couldn't quite put my finger on. Are you a chicken or what? Em stuck her tongue out, and I rolled my eyes, allowing her to line me up behind her friends, who were cheering loudly. It was fun, really. We pranced through town, singing, drinking. Honestly, it's been a while since I let go like that. But then, something changed. The procession wasn't heading towards the city hall like it was supposed to, but somewhere out of town. That in itself, admittedly, didn't feel like such a big deal. It was easy to see why people wouldn't want to stop and dance for just a bit longer. The music, the loud singing from people, it was all exhilarating. Still, somehow, I felt uneasiness sneak into my chest. I grabbed Em by the hand just as she nearly slipped away from me. She was dancing around a teen roughly her age, one of the original dancers who wore a fancy costume and fun markings on her cheeks. "Stay close to me, Em." She was pretty, all right, but I didn't feel comfortable being separated from my sister, not by her or anyone. "Why are you being such a spoilsport?" Em pouted up at me. She was breathing heavily, her voice a bit raspy already from having too much fun. I shrugged, but then I motioned for the dancers. They were starting to separate themselves from the rest of the crowd. "Looks like they're gonna do another performance or something. You don't want to be stuck there without knowing the choreography, do you?" It was just an excuse, of course. I had absolutely no idea if I was right or wrong. However, it made sense to me at that time. It took my sister a few seconds to answer. She looked almost a bit dazed, eyes still set on the dancer from before. I had to admit, I understood why she was so mesmerized. Just like all the others in the dance troupe, the girl was gorgeous. And well, she was also moving in a near hypnotizing manner. No, I wouldn't want that to happen. I ruffled my sister's hair lovingly, tugging her along as we headed down empty streets. We were almost out of the suburbs by then, headed straight for the woods. The air was much warmer than I'd expected it to be, almost too heated. I wanted a little bit more of it, admittedly. It was suffocating being so close to so many people for more than a few minutes, after all. I noticed my chest tightening just as I was pushed into a tall man from behind. I was being too slow. He didn't react, and neither did the person behind me. It was as if they didn't even notice that they were squishing me between each other. It took me a solid minute to wrangle myself out of my makeshift prison. "You okay?" Em asked, worry shining in her eyes. I nodded quickly, but motioned to the side of the crowd where it wasn't as thick. "Want to just leave for a sec? I need to breathe a bit. We can join back in right after." That time around, I was the one led by Emmy. She was used to it by then, I believe. My asthma liked to act up when it least needed to, after all. Still, it took us a few minutes to wrangle our bodies through the dancers. It was a bit bizarre, almost. I'd been to many concerts before, and the crowd was always, at least a bit more understanding. Sure, it was a bit different from dancing constantly and moving forward than just watching a show, but still. Once we were a bit outside of the procession, I could finally breathe. I felt lightheaded, almost drunk on the music and people, but I snapped out of it quickly as I took a few puffs of my inhaler. My lungs were still a bit too tight. "Want to head back soon?" Em asked, staring straight ahead of her. There was something a bit odd about the way her gaze never left the dancer from before. She craned her neck further and further as the girl danced past us. She was in the front row completely with the rest of her group. Only then did I realize that we were somehow all standing in the cemetery. Wait, how did we get here without me realizing it? I felt a lot more lucid as I shook my head, looking around in order to try and see if anyone else but me cared. Hundreds of people were still singing and dancing around. They seemed to be pretty much ignoring our new location. Perhaps they'd known already? Still, just as Em started tugging me back into the head of the dancing mass of people, I heard it. A man cleared his throat. He was standing on top of a grave, short but somehow intimidating. Like the dancers, he wore gold effortlessly.
My children, I thank thee for bringing me so many new souls. Our father, the banished son, will be so glad to hear of your good deeds on the day of...
Only as he talked on and on did it finally dawn on me. The people still swaying to the rhythm of music we couldn't even hear anymore weren't just enjoying the vibe of the procession. We're trapped. I hissed, reaching out to grab my sister by the arm. But she wasn't there. Em, what the heck? Where are you? She didn't respond. It took me a whole minute, and it felt much longer to locate her. She was once more around the girl from before, laughing, dancing around her as if she hadn't heard the man. She probably hadn't. I swallowed hard. My sister seemed lost, her eyes empty, lips constantly moving as if she was chanting something. I started to hear it from others too, their quiet words quickly morphing into something much louder. My focus was solely on Em, though. I felt so scared. After all, it seems like I could slip away, but only without her. I was the only one still somewhat lucid. Everyone around us seemed far too gone. But why? It took me a moment to realize. My earplugs. I'd worn them to the carnival to be able to hear my own thoughts, since I was quite sensitive to sound. Perhaps for some reason, they were blocking out whatever was causing others to lose their minds. I had to choose. Try and get Em, but likely fail, or get away. I ran. I didn't look back a single time, not when someone started chasing me, not when I could hear them catch up with me. I wanted more time to think of a plan, to figure out a way to save her, but that never came. They dragged me back, laughing. The words that meant nothing to me slipped off their lips, sticky like honey and yet filled with poison. The music picked up again. There was laughter, singing, dancing, and then a bright flash of light. Everything around us ceased to exist right after. It was all but darkness and pain. So much pain.
They say nothing is ever given, only earned. Years ago, my wife and I were met with an opportunity that completely rejected this idea. We were young then, far poorer too. We were desperate for a house, and the ones that we'd been looking round that were within our budget were run down and dangerous. We thought they were our only options. Until one day, we were met with the offer of a lifetime. Now, we remember it as the offer of 2 lives.
Harry, are we sure this place is legit? There's no way this is the same price as some of the other shacks we've been looking around.
Jessica, my wife, was extremely suspicious of the mansion we were currently being toured around. I mean, it's certainly bizarre that such a big place is worth so little. Maybe it's the area? I was trying to wrap my head around it too. We had been looking around houses that were practically falling apart up until now, so to suddenly be met with a house of this grandeur for the same price, it was unheard of. After some deliberation and another hour spent exploring the place, we had failed to find any faults with it. A week or so later, we bought it. Desperation transcended any worries or concerns we had with the unusual pricing-to-house ratio. The opportunity just seemed all too good to miss out on. Perhaps we had finally found ourselves a stroke of luck. Only our luck was hollow. Our first day moving in, we were still plagued by awe at the white marble floors and beautifully painted walls. There was a golden chandelier hanging from the ceiling in the kitchen and the bedroom. It was the same size as my parents' entire upper floor.
I can't believe it. Is this really our home?
Jessica warbled, her eyes seeping crystallized tears. They were tears of joy. I paused for a moment. I thought I heard something like scratching coming from the wall. Shaking my head, I walked over to Jessica and hugged her tightly. I was crying slightly too. This was far beyond just a welcome change in our miserable lives. Both of us worked office jobs 9 until 5 every day for minimum wage. At least now we would be coming home each day to a magnificent place to sleep. And no parents whining, criticizing, shouting, and so on. Behind us, 2 men came in carrying our only piece of furniture, aside from the bed, that we owned. It was an old sofa, blackened with dust, fading with age. They set it down behind us before heading back out to grab the boxes with the rest of what little possessions we had were in. Releasing each other, Jess and I started pushing the sofa up against the wall. Suddenly, The sound of scratching came from within. It was the same noise as I had heard before, only louder. Probably the pipes? I spoke immediately, trying to block out any indication of a fault in the house. The price obviously meant something was wrong with it, but we dared not discover what it was, for our own sake. We gave each other an uneasy glance, but more boxes were coming in, so we walked away, trying to ignore the noise. The scratching was getting louder. We went to bed later that night, smiling, streams of tears dripping down our eyes as we rested in our new home. Life seemed so good. The scratching was getting louder. The next morning, we went down for breakfast and sat merrily, chomping away at our toast and butter, sipping away at the luscious cups of tea we made in our new kitchen. Scratching louder. Day after day, the routine progressed. The scratching became clawing, screaming, death amplified by sound. We caved. Something was making that noise. We called the estate agent the following morning, panic infused into our voices.
Julia here, how can I help?
She chirped, answering the phone. We spoke to her about the scratching noises coming from inside the walls, to which she gave the odd, and okay, but never anything more. It was like she already had an answer, right from when she picked up the phone. Eventually, it became clear that she wasn't listening in the slightest. Jessica didn't react so well to that.
What the hell is going on in our house?
She screeched down the phone. There was a moment of silence. Julia breathed in, and suddenly, life had embedded itself into her as she began to speak.
I'm sorry. I'm not so sure I can help you two. That house you're in, it's terrifying to me. The last estate agent who was allocated to it went missing the day he was due to tour around this guy, recently divorced, I heard, when he never came back to the office. The police hunted for him, but both he and the set of house keys were gone, and there was no word back from the divorced man either. I don't want to be any more involved with that place any more than I already am. Goodbye.
She slammed down the phone on the other end of the call. Both Jessica and I stood there, jaws open, staring at the phone in utter disbelief. We tried sleeping that night, but Julia's words had gotten to us, like an infection of sorts. The sound of the scratching had become unbearable, and there was this horrid stench reeking throughout the house. And all of it was strongest and loudest in the living room, behind our sofa. We both sat up in bed, gave each other a look of determination, and darted downstairs, heading into the garage to grab a hammer. Now, we both stood in the living room, staring at the wall behind the sofa. I grasped the hammer in my right hand, and Jessica had her phone out in hers, the flash turned on. We flicked off the lights and saw that the paint on the wall right above the sofa was a different color to the paint around it. Our suspicions were right. We flicked on the light, and taking a deep gust of air, I began smashing down the wall. It fell apart with ease. It was poorly made, hollow. As I broke away at the drywall, the stench erupted. We covered our noses to avoid asphyxiation from the dreadful aroma. All of a sudden, as I broke apart more and more of the wall, a stampede of rats came sprinting out from the space behind it. They spread all over the floor, with blood trailing behind them. Our attention twisted back to inside the wall, and our eyes widened. Jessica instantly bolted away towards the bathroom, followed by the sound of vomit gushing from her mouth. I, however, remained still in the living room, paralyzed. I was staring into the empty eye sockets of a dead man, still suited up in the same style of outfit as our estate agent, Julia, had worn. There were keys lodged down his throat, his entire jugular displaced, still leaking with blood. The rest of his body was ripped apart, and the stench of rot filled the house with its grotesque essence. His skull had been caved in, too. Hours later, once the police had arrived, through the flood of tears and cries of horror, I overheard the police discussing that they had just found another corpse, bludgeoned to death. A pair of house keys belonging to this very house were found lodged down her throat. It didn't take a scientist to see the link. The other victim was identified to be the ex of the divorced man who had been touring around there just months before. The keys lodged down the estate agent's throat were keys to his old house, the same house his ex had still been living in. Perhaps it was a fit of rage, a coping method, a desire for revenge. We moved out the following week. We had a feeling the man wasn't finished.